Before we dive into today's journey, have you ever experienced something strange while out camping? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build this haven of eerie campfire tales together. My name is Melissa Potter. I'm 35 years old, and this happened last December in Blackwater Falls State Park, West Virginia. I had just landed my first solo freelance assignment, a travel feature for an outdoor magazine. It was my chance to prove to myself and maybe to a few others that I could thrive on my own after leaving a toxic relationship. I didn't expect the park's breathtaking beauty to be marred by whispers of the past, or that those whispers would grow louder with each passing night. When I first arrived, the park was everything I'd hoped for. My RV fit snugly into a secluded campsite overlooking the gorge, the roar of the falls constant in the distance. Blackwater Falls was a photographer's dream: cascading water, mist rising through the gorge, and vibrant autumn foliage painted in fiery reds and oranges. The first day was perfect. I hiked, shot hundreds of photos, and scribbled notes about the trails and wildlife. The peace and quiet were a balm, exactly what I needed after months of turmoil. That evening, I sat by the fire, sipping tea and scrolling through my shots. That's when I saw it for the first time. At the edge of one frame, a figure stood between two trees. It was a man, his clothes ragged and his face shadowed. I frowned, zooming in, but the details remained blurred. I didn't remember seeing anyone during my hike, and the figure hadn't appeared in any other photos. I shook it off as an optical illusion, probably a trick of light and shadow, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The second day brought strange encounters. I started the morning by stopping at the visitor center, hoping to get some local insight. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, was friendly but seemed to be watching me too closely. She eyed my camera gear and smiled knowingly. "Planning to photograph the falls?" she asked. "That's the idea," I replied. Maggie hesitated, her smile faltering. "Be careful around the falls, especially near dusk. The dead don't like company." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Before I could ask more, she turned to help another guest, leaving me with a vague unease. Later, on a trail to the falls, I ran into Gary, a park ranger. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a genial demeanor. As he gave me a quick overview of the park's history, I brought up Maggie's warning. He chuckled. "Oh, that's just local folklore. Back in the Civil War, there was a Confederate soldier who hid out in the gorge. They say he deserted his regiment and was hunted down near the falls. Some folks claim his spirit never left. But I've worked here for years and never seen a thing." I tried to laugh with him, but his words stayed with me. That evening, the first real sign of something unnatural occurred. I set up my tripod near the falls, hoping to capture the golden hour light. As I framed the shot, my breath caught. The air around me had turned frigid, my breath fogging in front of me despite the mild weather. My camera refused to focus, the lens shuddering as if something was blocking it. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard whispers. I spun around, expecting to see other hikers, but I was alone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and indecipherable, like a crowd speaking just out of earshot. The unease became unbearable, and I packed up in a rush, leaving the falls as the last light of day faded. That night, back at the RV, I reviewed the day's photos. Most were stunning, the falls bathed in warm golden light. But in 3 of them, the figure from the previous day appeared again. This time, he was closer, standing at the edge of the water. His face was clearer now, pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where his eyes should have been, and in the last photo, he was staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut and locked the RV door. The next morning, I debated cutting the trip short, but a part of me couldn't let it go. I'd always prided myself on being rational, and I wasn't going to let a few strange occurrences ruin my assignment. While hiking near the falls, I noticed an overgrown side trail. Curiosity tugged at me, and I followed it, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. It led to a clearing where the air felt heavier, almost oppressive. In the center of the clearing was a patch of disturbed earth, as though something had been buried there long ago. Nearby, I found an object half buried in the dirt, a weathered leather journal. The pages were brittle but legible, written in a looping, old-fashioned script. The entries told the story of a Confederate soldier who had deserted his regiment and fled into the gorge. His words were filled with fear and desperation. The nights grow colder and I hear them coming. I cannot outrun my fate. The last entry read, "They will find me tonight. I will not see another sunrise." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the oppressive feeling returned. The RV's lights flickered and shadows danced across the walls, moving in ways that didn't match the firelight outside. And then I saw him. The soldier stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his hollow eyes locked onto mine. My chest tightened with fear as I realized he wasn't alone. Shadows emerged from the trees, darker and more twisted, their forms writhing like smoke. They whispered accusations, voices overlapping in a cacophony. "Traitor! Coward! You will not leave." Panicking, I grabbed the journal and held it up. "Is this what you want?" I shouted. The soldier's expression shifted. Sadness, perhaps gratitude, and he gestured toward the disturbed earth I'd seen earlier. I understood. Clutching the journal, I ran back to the clearing. The shadows followed, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. My hands shook as I placed the journal on the grave and whispered a quiet prayer for peace. The air around me grew still. The shadows stopped, their forms dissolving into the night. The soldier lingered for a moment longer, his hollow eyes softening before fading into the mist. By morning, the oppressive feeling had lifted. The forest seemed brighter, the air lighter, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. Before leaving, I stopped at the visitor center to return the journal. Maggie was there, her knowing smile greeting me. "You helped him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She reached out, patting my hand. "He's free now. You did a good thing." As I drove away from Blackwater Falls, I realized the experience had changed me. I didn't have all the answers, but I no longer felt the weight of doubt and fear that had followed me into the park. Sometimes the past lingers in ways we can't explain, and sometimes all it takes to move forward is to lay it to rest. I had been staring at the sinkhole for hours. The edges of the earth had crumbled away into a perfect, jagged circle, leaving nothing but a gaping void beneath me. It was unnervingly symmetrical, as though the ground hadn't collapsed on its own, but had been carved out by something, or someone. I crouched at the edge, carefully adjusting my geological scanner, but the equipment was giving me nothing but static. The readings were all over the place. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, tapping the scanner in frustration. I hadn't come all the way to Hollow Creek for faulty data. I took a deep breath and scanned the horizon. The thick pines loomed like sentinels around the campground, the pale light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the landscape. My RV sat parked a short distance away, looking small and vulnerable against the vast wilderness of Chugach National Forest. It was a beautiful place, no doubt. Quiet, remote, exactly what I needed to clear my head. But the silence had a weight to it, an unnatural stillness that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I was here on a solo trip, tasked with investigating the sudden appearance of several sinkholes that had been forming in the area. Geological instability was the theory, but something about the way these holes formed had raised red flags from the moment I arrived. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Ethan, the local park ranger, and the closest thing to human contact I'd had in days. His voice crackled through the static as I picked up. "Hey, Megan, how's it going out there?" "Not great," I admitted. "The equipment's glitching again, and these sinkholes, I don't know. They feel weird. Not like anything I've seen before." Ethan chuckled, but there was an edge to it. Hollow Creek's always been strange. You wouldn't be the first to think something's off here. "What do you mean?" I asked, standing up and dusting off my jeans. "You ever hear the stories about this place?" Locals believe the sinkholes are more than just geological shifts. They think there's something ancient beneath the earth. The indigenous people used to call it the land that breathes. They thought the earth here was alive, that it could swallow you whole if you weren't careful. I rolled my eyes, though the words stirred an uneasy feeling deep in my gut. "Sounds like folklore to me." "Maybe," Ethan said, his tone serious now. "But I'd be careful if I were you. These woods have a way of playing tricks on you. And the sinkholes, well, they've taken people before. People who didn't listen to the warnings. I didn't respond right away, staring down into the abyss of the sinkhole in front of me. I'd studied rocks and underground formations for most of my career, but nothing had prepared me for the unnerving stillness of this place. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "But I'm here to study geology, not ghosts." Ethan sighed. "Just don't go too deep, okay? Call if you need anything." I hung up and pocketed the phone, but the conversation lingered in my mind. The land that breathes. Superstition, I told myself. Just old stories. I turned back to the sinkhole. Something inside me itched to see what was beneath the surface, to understand what was causing the ground to shift in such a strange, unnatural way. The patterns in the rocks I had been studying weren't like any natural formation I'd seen before. There were spirals, perfectly etched into the stone, as though by design, not by nature. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't meant to find. That night, the first signs of trouble came in the form of noise, a low, deep rumbling that vibrated through the ground like the hum of a giant unseen machine. It started just as I was finishing dinner, sitting by the campfire. So the sounds blended into the whispering wind at first, but then it grew louder, more distinct, like a deep pulse coming from below. I stood, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The stars were barely visible, shrouded in the thick clouds that seemed to roll in out of nowhere. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps, something moving in the dark. "Ethan?" I called, my voice small against the vast silence. Nothing. I walked toward the sinkhole, my stomach knotting with every step. The rumbling grew louder, and as I reached the edge, I felt it, vibrations under my feet. The ground beneath me was shifting, alive. I shone my flashlight down into the hole, but the beam disappeared into the blackness, swallowed by the depths. I knelt, running my hand along the edge. The earth was soft, loose, as though it had only recently begun to settle after something had disturbed it. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I scrambled backward, heart racing, just as a section of the earth collapsed, sending a cascade of dirt and rocks into the sinkhole. I fell onto my back, gasping for air, watching as the hole grew wider, deeper, like a hungry mouth devouring the ground. Adrenaline pumped through me as I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a geological phenomenon. Something was moving beneath the surface, something massive. I rushed back to the RV, the flashlight beam bouncing erratically as I fumbled for the key. But as I reached the door, the ground shook again. Harder this time. The sinkhole was growing fast. I had to leave now. But then a thought struck me. What if I was right? What if this was something no one had ever discovered before? If I could just capture proof, if I could document what was really happening here, my work would be revolutionary. I would be vindicated. My mind flashed back to the spirals in the rock, the patterns that had seemed too deliberate to be natural. There was something ancient beneath the earth, and I was so close. I grabbed my gear and rushed back to the edge of the sinkhole. My heart pounded in my chest as I descended carefully into the darkness, lowering myself into the opening. The air grew colder as I went deeper. The walls of the hole were damp and slick beneath my hands. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the bottom. The cavern was vast, much larger than I had anticipated. My flashlight illuminated jagged rock formations, but it was the carvings on the walls that caught my breath. Symbols, spirals etched deep into the stone. They were everywhere, ancient and deliberate. This wasn't just a natural formation. This was a structure, a temple of some kind, buried deep beneath the earth for centuries, maybe longer. I pulled out my camera, hands trembling, and began to record. But as I did, a low, resonating sound filled the cavern, a rhythmic pulse like the beating of a massive heart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then from the shadows, I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the deeper recesses of the cavern. Something was moving toward me. Something massive. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the stone walls. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever was in the darkness, it was getting closer. I could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a primal force that made my skin crawl. The footsteps stopped, and then a deep, guttural growl echoed through the cavern. I ran. I didn't look back. The ground trembled beneath me as I scrambled up the wall of the sinkhole, my hands slipping on the loose earth. The growling grew louder, closer, until I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the sinkhole, gasping for air, and ran toward the RV. The ground shook violently, and as I reached the door, I glanced back. The sinkhole was collapsing in on itself, the earth swallowing it whole. But for a split second, I saw something massive, serpentine, rising from the depths before it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait. I threw open the door, started the engine, and sped away, leaving Hollow Creek behind me. By the time I reached the main road, my heart had finally begun to slow. I was alive. I had made it. But the images of that cavern, those symbols, haunted my mind. I had uncovered something ancient, that wasn't meant to be found. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have stayed buried, something that was still there, waiting beneath the earth, and I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't be going back. My name is Nathan Matthews. I'm 63, a retired firefighter, and this happened in Seneca Creek backcountry, West Virginia, a year after I lost my wife, Emily. I had planned the trip hoping to find peace, or at least distraction, in nature. What I found was something I can never forget. It started as a simple RV camping trip, my first time alone. Emily and I had always loved the outdoors, and this seemed like a way to reconnect with that part of my life. Seneca Creek, with its waterfalls and isolation, felt like the perfect place to be alone with my thoughts. I told myself the solitude would help, that it was what I needed. I wasn't ready for what came next. The drive into the backcountry was uneventful. The gravel road leading to the campsite felt endless, hemmed in by towering trees that cast long shadows even in the midday sun. I stopped at a small gas station near the turnoff, where an older woman named Marlene ran the counter. "You're heading into Seneca Creek?" she asked as I paid for firewood and a few snacks. I nodded. "Yeah, just me and the RV." Marlene gave me a strange look, her hand pausing over the register. "Be careful out there," she said, her voice low. "These woods aren't always kind to those traveling alone." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she turned away to help another customer. Her words lingered in my mind as I drove the final stretch. The campsite by Judy Springs was everything I'd hoped for: quiet, picturesque, and completely isolated. I parked the RV near the creek, the sound of rushing water a soothing backdrop as I unpacked. That first night, I sat by the fire sipping coffee and staring at the stars. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The first sign that something wasn't right came the next evening. The day had been perfect. I hiked to Seneca Falls, taking photos and jotting notes in a journal I'd started since Emily's death. I even smiled a few times, thinking about how much she would have loved the view. But as I headed back to camp, a strange feeling crept over me. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots on the trail. When I reached the RV, the unease deepened. My firewood, neatly stacked by the pit, was scattered across the ground. At first, I thought an animal had gotten into it, but the pieces were arranged strangely, like they'd been tossed deliberately. I shrugged it off and rebuilt the fire, telling myself I was imagining things. But that night, as I sat by the flames, I saw it for the first time. A shadow moved between the trees. It wasn't the flicker of firelight. This was deliberate, purposeful, like someone pacing at the edge of the forest. I stood up, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, the sound of my own voice startling me. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees. Nothing. But as I turned back to the fire, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shape, humanoid but wrong, slipped behind a tree, vanishing before I could focus on it. I slept in the RV that night, doors locked and curtains drawn. The third day brought more unsettling signs. I woke to find muddy footprints leading from the creek to the RV. They were human-sized but elongated, the toes too long and splayed. They stopped abruptly a few feet from the door, as if whoever or whatever made them had simply vanished. That afternoon, while hiking to an overlook, I stumbled upon something even stranger. Symbols carved into the rocks. They weren't like any markings I'd seen before, almost as if they were burned into the stone. The air felt heavier there, as if the forest were holding its breath. I hurried back to camp, but the unease followed me. That night, the shadows returned. This time they were closer. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. The shadowy figure appeared again, standing motionless at the edge of the trees. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs were unnaturally long. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. It didn't move. The fire flickered, the flames shrinking as if smothered by an unseen force. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. When I looked again, the figure was gone. By the fourth morning, I'd had enough. I packed up, determined to leave. But the RV wouldn't start. The engine cranked but refused to turn over, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I decided to hike back to the gas station for help. I marked my trail carefully, leaving a breadcrumb trail of sticks and rocks so I wouldn't get lost. But the forest had other plans. No matter which direction I went, the paths looped back to my campsite. I walked for hours, my legs aching, only to find myself standing in front of the RV again. As the sun set, the shadows returned. This time, there were more of them. Figures moved through the trees surrounding the campsite, their glowing yellow eyes piercing the darkness. I barricaded myself inside the RV, clutching a flare gun I'd brought for emergencies. The shadows circled outside, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud against the silence. Then the radio came on. Static filled the air, crackling and distorted before a song began to play, a song I hadn't heard since Emily's funeral. It was her favorite. And hearing it now, here, made my blood run cold. Her voice followed, faint and pleading. "Nathan, leave." I stared at the radio, my hands trembling. "Emily?" The voice came again, softer this time. "You have to go." The shadows closed in, their forms pressing against the windows of the RV. I fired the flare through the nearest window, the bright red light igniting the darkness. The figures recoiled, their shapes dissolving like smoke. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the keys and tried the ignition one last time. The engine roared to life. I drove through the night, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The forest seemed alive, the trees bending unnaturally as if trying to block my escape. When I finally reached the gas station, Marlene was waiting. She didn't seem surprised to see me, her expression unreadable. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. Marlene sighed. "It's the Shadow Man. He feeds on people's grief, their fear. He doesn't kill. He traps you, keeps you lost in the dark until there's nothing left." I left West Virginia the next day, vowing never to return. The shadows are gone now, but sometimes, late at night, I hear faint footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if the Shadow Man ever truly let me go. I hadn't planned on staying at Stillwater Grove. The campground wasn't even marked on my map, just a small patch of green near the edge of Shawnee National Forest. But as I drove down the empty forest road, I saw the sign, old weathered wood with the words Stillwater Grove Campground, carved into it. It felt like an invitation, one I couldn't resist. I'd been on the road for weeks, photographing wildlife for a personal project I'd picked up after quitting my job. The last few months had been a blur of long drives, lonely campsites, and an overwhelming need to be anywhere but back in the city. I didn't miss my corporate job or my ex. What I did miss was the feeling that I knew what the hell I was doing with my life. Stillwater Grove seemed perfect. Quiet, isolated, and right by the lake. It would give me the break I needed, some peace before heading back into the real world. When I pulled into the campsite, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grove. The air was still, the only sound being the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A single RV sat on the far side of the campground, a distant figure moving near it. Otherwise, it was just me. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, the water glistening under the fading light. After setting up camp, I grabbed my camera and headed toward the shore, hoping to catch the sunset. As I stood there framing the perfect shot, a voice startled me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face half in shadow. She had an otherworldly kind of beauty. Pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Yeah," I replied, lowering my camera. "It's peaceful." She smiled. "It always is here." "I'm Ellie, by the way." "Nick," I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold, like she'd been standing in the shade for too long. "You camping here too?" "For a little while." she said, her voice soft. "I come here every now and then, can't stay away." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I wasn't used to talking to people much anymore. The solitude had become my comfort zone, and something about Ellie felt out of place. "You here for the fishing?" I asked, trying to make small talk. She shook her head. "No, just the lake. The quiet." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, the water reflecting the colors like a mirror. I raised my camera, snapping a few shots, and when I looked back, Ellie was gone. Just like that. I glanced around, but there was no sign of her. The other RV was still parked at the far end of the grove, but there was no movement. I chalked it up to her being quick on her feet, though it left me feeling oddly unsettled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside rustle against each other like whispered secrets. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but something felt off. The RV was too cold, colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but everything seemed normal. Still, the chill lingered. I grabbed a blanket and tried to force myself to sleep. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, barely audible at first, like a woman's voice carried on the wind. I sat up, listening, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I thought. Long days alone in the woods will do that to you. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a soft, melodic humming coming from outside. I climbed out of bed, grabbing my flashlight. My breath fogged up in the cold air as I stepped outside the RV, scanning the campsite. Nothing. Just the stillness of the lake and the trees swaying gently in the wind. But the humming persisted, coming from near the water's edge. I walked toward the shore, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the ground, and that's when I saw her. A woman in white, standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. Her long, dark hair hung loose down her back, swaying slightly as she hummed that haunting tune. "Ellie?" I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't turn. She just stood there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the water. Something about the way she stood, so still, so rigid, set my nerves on edge. I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating her pale figure, but as soon as the light touched her, she vanished. I blinked, stunned. 1 second she'd been there, and the next, she was gone. The water rippled where she had been standing, but otherwise, the lake was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, my hands were shaking. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but what I'd seen, it wasn't right. I had seen her. I knew I had. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to rationalize what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing by the lake. The next morning, I found Ellie near the grove, sitting by a small campfire. She smiled when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, as if she already knew. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. "I saw something last night, a woman by the lake. I thought it was you, but she wasn't there when you got close." Ellie finished, her voice calm, too calm. "The Lady of Stillwater." "The what?" I asked, feeling a chill run through me. Ellie looked at me, her eyes dark and hollow. "She's been here for a long time, longer than the campground, longer than the trees. She drowned in the lake, or so the story goes. Some say she was waiting for someone. Her lover, I think, but he never showed." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "You're telling me she's a ghost?" Ellie shrugged. "Call it what you want, but she's real, and now that you've seen her, she won't let you go." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "That's insane." "Is it?" Ellie asked, her gaze locking onto mine. "You saw her. You know she's real." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. I had seen her, and it hadn't been a trick of the light or my imagination. Something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. "What does she want?" I asked quietly. Ellie's eyes flicked toward the lake. "She wants what she's always wanted, to take someone with her into the water." That night, the sound started again. At first, it was the soft humming drifting through the night air, then the splashing, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading through the water. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my body tense. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her again. But the pull was stronger this time. A strange compulsion tugged at me, drawing me toward the lake. I tried to fight it, to stay in the RV, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me outside into the cold night air. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale moonlight. And there she was, standing in the water, her white dress billowing around her as if moved by an unseen current. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "Please come." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The water lapped at my shoes, and I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. "Come with me," she said again, her voice almost pleading now. I've waited so long. I fought to resist, to break free from whatever force was drawing me in. But my feet kept moving, the water now up to my knees, freezing cold. I could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the water dragging me down. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I stumbled onto the shore. Ellie stood beside me, her face pale, her grip strong. "You have to leave," she said, her voice urgent now, "before it's too late." I looked back at the lake, but the woman was gone. The water was still, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Ellie's expression was grim. "She's marked you now. If you stay, she'll take you. You have to go." I didn't argue. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Within minutes, I was back in the RV, starting the engine and pulling out of the campsite as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie stood at the edge of the grove, watching me go, her face unreadable, and behind her, just barely visible in the mist, was the Lady of Stillwater, her pale eyes following me, waiting for me to return. I didn't look back again. My name is Adam Patterson, and I'm 44 years old. This happened last summer while I was investigating a viral ghost story at Devil's Backbone in West Virginia. I've spent years debunking hauntings, cryptid sightings, and so-called cursed places. It's what I do for a living, exposing frauds and hoaxes on my YouTube channel, Reality Bites. I never expected Devil's Backbone to be any different. I was wrong. I arrived at the trailhead late in the afternoon, the sunlight painting the jagged cliffs of the ridge in deep orange hues. Devil's Backbone stretched before me, an imposing line of rocky outcroppings and dense forest. The campground was deserted. Just me, my RV, and a few empty fire pits surrounded by overgrown weeds. Perfect for filming. I set up my equipment, cameras, microphones, a drone for aerial shots. I like to have all the angles covered, even if I expected nothing more than crickets and wind. The legend that brought me here was as ridiculous as they come. A group of hikers claimed they'd heard chanting and seen glowing symbols near the ridge. The story had racked up millions of views online, and I figured a straightforward debunking would bring in decent traffic. But something about the ridge unsettled me. It wasn't just the isolation. The cliffs had a presence, like they were watching, waiting. After setting up camp, I hiked up to the ridge for some preliminary footage. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through a forest of twisted, ancient trees. Their gnarled branches formed a canopy that filtered the sunlight into eerie, shifting patterns. About halfway up, I spotted the first symbol. It was carved into the rock, jagged and precise. At first, I thought it was graffiti, but it didn't look modern. No spray paint or amateur scribbles. It was intricate, like something you'd see in a textbook on ancient languages. I snapped a photo and moved on, telling myself it was probably just a prank. As I climbed higher, I started to hear faint humming. It wasn't wind or birds, it was rhythmic, almost like chanting. I paused, holding my breath to listen, but it stopped the moment I tried to pinpoint its direction. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the forest below. I launched my drone, hoping to capture the cliffs from above. The drone whirred into the sky, its camera sending back clear, steady footage of the ridge and surrounding woods. Then, without warning, the feed cut out. I stared at the screen, confused. The drone was still airborne, but its signal was gone. Moments later, it plummeted out of the sky, crashing somewhere in the trees. Frustrated, I made a note to retrieve it in the morning and headed back to camp. As darkness fell, the first few hours of night were uneventful. I sat inside my RV, editing the day's footage and making notes for the next day. Around midnight, I stepped outside to check the cameras I'd placed around the site. That's when I saw the lights. They flickered along the ridge, moving slowly, like lanterns swaying in the wind. I grabbed my binoculars and focused in. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. A figure stood on the edge of the cliff. It was shrouded in shadow, its features indistinct, but it was watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my best effort to stay calm. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it raised an arm and pointed directly at me. I backed into the RV, slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I locked it, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe another camper playing a prank. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found scratches on the RV's exterior. They were deep, parallel grooves like claw marks running along the side of the vehicle. My stomach churned. I checked my cameras, but the footage was corrupted, static and flickers of distorted images. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I hiked back up the ridge. This time, the symbols were everywhere. They were carved into trees, etched into rocks, even scratched into the dirt. The humming started again, louder and more persistent. I reached the crash site of my drone, but it wasn't there. Instead, I found a backpack. It was torn open, its contents scattered. A water bottle, a map, a trail guide. There was no sign of its owner. As I examined the scene, I felt the air grow colder. A shadow passed over me, and I turned to see the figure from the night before, standing just a few feet away. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, its face shrouded in darkness, except for its eyes, glowing like embers. I ran. Back at camp, I tried to start the RV, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The figure appeared again, standing at the edge of the clearing. This time it stepped closer. "Why are you here?" A voice hissed, low and guttural. I froze, my mind racing. I thought about Vanessa Davis, the historian I'd spoken to before coming here. She'd warned me about the site's history, that a coven of witches had been executed here centuries ago, accused of summoning spirits to protect their land. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll leave, just let me go." The figure tilted its head as if considering my words. Then it raised a hand, and the symbols around the campsite began to glow, forming a circle of light that trapped me inside. The voice returned, louder this time. "You seek truth where none is welcome. Leave this place or be consumed by it." Desperate, I searched my gear for anything I could use. I found a small bag of salt, an old trick I'd learned for warding off supposed spirits. I poured it around the RV, forming a crude barrier. The figure screamed, a sound that shook the ground beneath me. It lunged at the barrier but couldn't cross it. "Stay away," I shouted, holding up the salt bag like a shield. The figure retreated, its glowing eyes fixed on me as it faded into the trees. By dawn, the symbols had disappeared, and the RV's engine started without issue. I didn't look back as I drove away, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. When I reviewed the footage later, most of it was unusable, blurry, distorted, filled with static. But one clip stood out. It showed the figure standing on the ridge, its glowing eyes staring directly into the camera. I uploaded the video to my channel, knowing it would be dismissed as a hoax. That was fine by me. Some truths aren't meant to be explained. I thought a week alone in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest would be the perfect way to clear my head after everything that had happened. The divorce, leaving the military, and that nagging feeling I'd wasted years of my life. I figured some isolation would help me reset, so I packed up my RV, grabbed my gear, and drove deep into the heart of the forest. I should have known better when I first pulled into the campsite. I felt that familiar sense of calm I used to get on deployment, a kind of satisfaction that comes with being prepared for whatever the wilderness might throw at me. The Apache Sitgreaves is a vast, rugged place, and this far in, you don't see many other campers. That's why I picked it. No people, no distractions, just the forest, my RV, and my thoughts. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV at the edge of a tree line overlooking a deep ravine. The view was incredible. The trees spread out like a sea of green, with the sun dipping low, casting long shadows over the land. I spent the first day hiking, snapping a few photos of the landscape and trying to relax. By nightfall, the temperature dropped sharply, but I welcomed the cold. It felt like the world was trying to numb me, erase the pain I'd been carrying since Rachel left. I lit a small fire, sat by it, and let the quiet settle in. That's what I wanted after all, but the silence felt different out here. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. The first night passed uneventfully, but something woke me around 3 a.m. I sat bolt upright, listening. There it was again, a sound just outside the RV. It wasn't the usual rustle of wildlife or the distant call of an owl. No, this was different. Slow, deliberate footsteps. At first, I thought maybe another camper had wandered into my area, but when I peered through the window, all I saw was blackness, the dense trees illuminated only by the faint moonlight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and biting. I swept the beam of light across the campsite, scanning the edges of the trees. The footsteps had stopped. Nothing moved. The fire had long since died out, leaving behind only a few glowing embers. No signs of anyone. I convinced myself it was probably just an animal and went back inside, locking the door behind me. But even as I lay back down, the hairs on the back of my neck stayed up, like I wasn't alone. By the second day, I was already starting to feel the isolation. The weather was turning colder than I'd expected, and to make matters worse, the RV's heater was acting up. It kept cutting out, leaving the inside freezing. At night, I spent hours trying to figure out what was wrong, but it was no use. I'd have to tough it out. I hiked out again that afternoon looking for some distraction. The forest was beautiful, but in an unforgiving way. The trails were rough, and after a while I veered off the main path, looking for more secluded spots to explore. I told myself it was for the photography, but really, I just wanted to be somewhere no one could find me. That's when I first saw the carvings. At first, I didn't even notice them. They were subtle, old, just faint marks on the trees. I stopped to take a break and caught sight of one right in front of me. A series of lines etched into the bark, almost like a symbol. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the grooves. It wasn't natural. Someone or something had put it there. As I moved on, I found more of them, scattered and in no particular pattern, but close enough to make me uneasy. They circled the area where I'd set up camp, like some kind of boundary. I shook off the strange feeling gnawing at my gut. This forest was old. People had been here long before me, carving symbols and marks for reasons long forgotten. Nothing to worry about. But I didn't stop worrying. That night I woke up again, the same time as before. 3 a.m. The footsteps were back, closer this time. The sound was unmistakable, soft but deliberate, like someone walking slowly around the RV, testing the ground with each step. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps circled the RV, paused, then resumed. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the flashlight but hesitated. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was something else? The footsteps stopped. Dead silence. Then I heard the tapping. Soft, rhythmic taps on the windows. My mouth went dry. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The taps grew louder, more insistent, coming from all sides of the RV now. I forced myself to get up slowly and crept to the nearest window. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain back just a little. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness outside. Nothing. Just the forest and the shadows. But when I looked again, I saw it. A handprint pressed against the glass, smudged and distorted like someone or something had leaned in close. The print was too large to be human. Its fingers were long, unnaturally so, and the palm had an odd, warped shape to it. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, my heart hammering in my chest. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, but the tapping eventually stopped. The air felt thick, like it was pushing down on me, suffocating me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping my hunting knife, waiting for the footsteps to return. By the third day, I was ready to leave. I packed my gear and decided to head out early. Whatever had been out there the night before, I didn't want to find out. But when I tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but nothing. Dead. The frustration boiled over into panic. I was stranded. I grabbed my map and decided I'd have to hike out to the nearest ranger station, a few miles away. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't stay here another night, not with whatever was out there. I set off down the trail, moving fast. The cold had seeped into my bones, but I pushed on, hoping to make it before dark. The forest felt different now, darker, heavier. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow hiding something just out of sight, and the feeling of being watched, it never went away. About halfway to the station, I heard it again, footsteps that weren't my own. I stopped, listening. My hand rested on the knife at my side. Then I heard a voice. It came from behind me, soft and distant. Liam. I froze. My blood ran cold. Liam, help me. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It was Rachel's voice, my ex-wife, but she wasn't here. She couldn't be here. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Liam. Her voice again, closer this time. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks on me. I started walking again, faster this time, my eyes darting around looking for any sign of movement. The voice followed me, calling my name over and over. I clenched my fists, trying to block it out, trying to focus on the trail. But then I saw it. Standing in the middle of the path, not 20 feet ahead. The figure was tall, too tall to be human. Its limbs were long and thin, draped in tattered rags that seemed to shift in the wind. Its face? There was no face. Just a void, a swirling mass of darkness where its features should have been. Its eyes, though. Its eyes were glowing. Bright yellow, like two embers burning in the night. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The thing didn't move. It just stood there watching me, waiting. I fumbled for my knife, holding it out in front of me, though I knew it wouldn't do any good. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no sense to it. This thing wasn't human. It wasn't natural. The Watcher, something from old Apache legends, stories I'd heard long ago, was real, and it had found me. The thing took a step forward, and I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. I don't remember much of the run. It was a blur of trees and shadows, the forest closing in on me as I tore through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes. The Watcher's eyes burned into my back. Somehow I made it to the ranger station. I don't know how, but when I stumbled into the clearing and saw the small building, I nearly collapsed in relief. I burst through the door, breathless and shaking. The ranger inside looked up, startled, but I couldn't form the words to explain what had happened. I didn't need to. When I finally caught my breath, I told him everything. The footsteps, the handprints, the thing in the forest. He didn't believe me, of course. Why would he? He checked my RV later, saw the scratches and the smudged handprint, but still shrugged it off. Probably just a bear, he said. But I know better. As I sit here now, writing this down, I can still feel it. The Watcher's eyes on me. It's waiting, watching, and it'll follow me no matter where I go. Some things you can't outrun. My name is Mary Bryant. I'm 25 years old, and this happened just last fall in the wilderness of Spruce Knob, West Virginia. I was there with my brother Mark, his girlfriend Emily, and his best friend Ryan. We had planned a week-long camping trip, what was supposed to be a much-needed break from the grind of everyday life. Instead, it became a nightmare I can barely talk about even now. It started as a simple idea. Mark, 28, was always the adventurous one. The kind of guy who thought following a marked trail was too easy. I went along because I needed to document local flora and fauna for my thesis in biology. Emily, also 28, tagged along to spend more time with Mark and indulge her love of spooky campfire stories. Then there was Ryan, 27, clumsy and lovable, eager to make memories away from his desk job. Together, we made an odd group, but we figured we'd have fun. We parked the RV at the Whispering Pines trailhead and set off into the dense, ancient forest. The air smelled of moss and pine, and sunlight dappled the ground through the canopy. Spruce Knob, the highest peak in West Virginia, loomed in the distance. Mark insisted we take an unmarked route he'd found on an old map, and despite my reservations, we followed him deeper into the woods. The first 2 days were relatively uneventful, apart from Ryan's usual mishaps. He forgot a tent pole, forcing us to patch his tent with duct tape. One of our flashlights died inexplicably, even though we'd checked all the batteries beforehand. Small annoyances, but nothing we couldn't handle. It was the second night when things began to feel off. We had set up camp near a clearing surrounded by spruce trees. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced on the surrounding trunks. Emily had just finished telling a story about the children of the forest, ghostly figures said to lure hikers to their deaths. Mark groaned and threw a pine cone at her. "Enough of that nonsense," he said. "You're going to scare Ryan." Ryan, to his credit, laughed nervously but didn't respond. That's when I noticed the quiet. The usual nighttime symphony of crickets and distant owls had stopped completely. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Mark smirked. I don't hear anything. That's the point. Peace and quiet, Jess. No, Emily said, her voice tight. She's right. It's too quiet. Mark rolled his eyes and poked the fire. You two are just looking for something to be scared about. I decided to let it go, but a gnawing unease crept into my chest. That night, I woke up to what sounded like footsteps circling the tents. They were deliberate, crunching softly on the forest floor. I held my breath, listening, my heart pounding. Mary. A voice whispered. It sounded like Mark. I unzipped my tent slowly, peeking out. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint glow. Just beyond the light, I saw Mark's silhouette standing by the trees. What are you doing? I hissed. He didn't respond. Mark? The figure turned and walked into the woods. My first thought was that he was sleepwalking. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out and followed. But when I reached the spot where I'd seen him, he was gone. There were no footsteps in the dirt. When I got back to the tents, Mark was snoring loudly inside his. The next morning, I told the group what I'd seen. Mark laughed it off. You were dreaming, he said. Too many ghost stories from Emily. I wasn't dreaming, I snapped. I know what I saw. Ryan looked uneasy but didn't say anything. Emily just stared at the ground. We packed up and continued hiking, but the atmosphere had changed. Mark's confidence began to grate on me. Emily kept glancing over her shoulder and Ryan's usual jokes dried up. Around midday, we stumbled upon something strange, a set of tracks in the dirt. They looked human, but larger, with elongated toes and claw marks at the tips. What kind of animal leaves tracks like that? I asked. Mark crouched down, frowning. Probably a bear with a weird gait. Bears don't have claws like that, Emily said, her voice trembling. Mark shrugged. Then maybe Bigfoot. Relax. But I couldn't relax. The tracks led straight toward our intended campsite. That night was worse. We built a larger fire and sat close to it as though the flames could ward off whatever was out there. Mark and Emily argued about whether we should turn back. Ryan stayed quiet, staring into the fire like it held answers. Then the laughter started. It was faint at first, like children playing hide and seek in the distance, but it grew louder, circling our camp. Who's there? Mark shouted, grabbing his flashlight. The beam flickered and went out. He smacked it against his palm, but it stayed dead. Mary. The voice was back, soft and lilting, but this time it wasn't alone. It was joined by Emily's voice, then Ryan's, all of them calling my name. Stay by the fire, Emily whispered, clutching my arm. Don't leave the firelight. Mark ignored her and stepped into the darkness. Mark, no, I shouted. He disappeared into the trees. We waited, calling for him, but he didn't answer. Then we saw him stumble back into the light. His face was pale, his eyes wide. It's not human, he said, his voice shaking. Before we could ask what he meant, the creature emerged. It stood just beyond the firelight, its form shifting and flickering like a mirage. One moment it looked like Mark, then Emily, then me. Its face stretched into an unnatural grin, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on us. Emily screamed. Ryan fell backward, scrambling away from the fire. Salt! Emily shouted suddenly. We need salt! I remembered the packets we'd brought for meals. I grabbed them from my bag, ripping them open and tossing the contents around the fire. The creature hissed and recoiled, its form blurring before it vanished into the shadows. We didn't sleep that night. Mark finally admitted we needed to leave, but when we reached the RV the next morning, we found the tires slashed, claw marks gouged into the doors. It doesn't want us to leave, Emily said, her voice hollow. Then we walk, I said. We'll head to the ranger station. The hike was grueling. Every sound in the forest set us on edge, and the feeling of being watched never left. By midday, the creature returned. It didn't attack, but followed us, always just out of sight. Sometimes it looked like Emily, sometimes like Mark, sometimes like something entirely inhuman. When we reached a narrow trail along a cliffside, it attacked. The creature lunged at Mark, who fought it off with a burning stick from our campfire. Go, he shouted. Get to the station. Mark, no, I screamed, but he wouldn't listen. He stood his ground, the flames casting his shadow long against the rocks. We ran. We reached the ranger station at dawn, our legs shaking, lungs burning. The creature didn't follow us into the sunlight, but Mark was gone. Even now, I dream of him standing at the edge of the woods, his eyes glowing yellow. He whispers, "Shh, I'm back." I never will. I'm not sure why I chose the Ocala National Forest. It wasn't really on my radar until a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's because Megan always talked about it, how beautiful the pine forests were, the springs. She was the nature person, not me. She practically begged me to take her camping here once, back when we were still together. I kept putting it off, using work as an excuse. Now, here I am in the middle of the forest, alone in my RV with nothing but my thoughts for company. I needed a break. That's what my doctor said. Unplug, he told me. You need to find yourself again. As if I ever had a real grasp of who I was to begin with. 2 weeks into my forced time off, I wasn't any closer to finding peace or clarity. I felt off. I didn't realize how addicted I was to being connected. No emails, no social media, no news feeds. Just silence and isolation. It was what I thought I wanted. The first night in the RV wasn't too bad. I parked in a secluded spot far from the main road, surrounded by towering pine trees. I managed to set up camp without any major problems. I had a fire going, and for a little while, I could almost see the appeal Megan always talked about. There was something peaceful about the forest, about the stillness, but it was the kind of stillness that quickly became unsettling when you were alone. By the time the sun set, the silence had grown thick. The only sound was the wind shifting through the pine needles, and every so often, the distant call of an owl. I tried to read one of the survival books I'd brought, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to her. Megan. We hadn't spoken since the divorce went through. 3 years of marriage dissolved in less than a month. I couldn't even tell you exactly when things went wrong. I just buried myself in work. She begged me to slow down, to reconnect, but I didn't listen. I told myself I was doing it for us, that the stress was worth it in the end. But by the time I realized how much I'd lost, it was too late. The fire crackled as the temperature dropped. I got up to grab my jacket from inside the RV. That's when I first heard it, a soft tapping sound, like something lightly knocking against the side of the RV. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. I leaned against the door, listening harder. The tapping continued, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, scanning the area around the RV. The light cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows. Probably just a branch in the wind, I muttered to myself, though the trees weren't close enough to the RV for that to make sense. I shut the door and locked it. The tapping had stopped, but I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I drifted off, I heard something. Footsteps, rustling. Things I couldn't explain away as easily as I wanted to. But when I looked outside, the forest was still. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were in the dirt around the RV, large and oddly spaced. Not animal tracks, but not quite human either. They seemed too long, too wide, like someone had been walking on the balls of their feet with unnatural precision. They circled the RV, stopping near the windows before disappearing into the trees. I crouched down to get a better look. The prints were deep, the kind that didn't come from a person casually walking. Whoever or whatever had made them was heavy, deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though there was no one around. I considered leaving, but I wasn't going to let some footprints freak me out. Besides, my RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, the engine just sputtered and clicked. The GPS on my phone was glitchy too, pointing me in all sorts of random directions before it finally went blank. Great. Just great. I spent most of the day walking, trying to calm my nerves. I stuck to the trails at first, but as the hours passed, I wandered deeper into the forest. The pine trees stretched up endlessly, their trunks so straight and uniform that I started losing track of where I was. I didn't mind being lost, not at first. It distracted me from the unease that had settled in my chest. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. Someone, standing just beyond the trees. I stopped dead, staring at the figure. It was tall, too tall, and unnaturally still. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but when I looked again, it was still there. A dark shape, humanoid but wrong, standing among the trees, watching me. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest. The figure didn't move. I took a step toward it, and in an instant it vanished. Not like it walked away, just gone, like it was never there. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the spot where the figure had been, before I finally turned and hurried back toward the RV. That night, the tapping started again. Louder this time, more insistent. I lay in bed, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The rhythmic tapping echoed around the RV, coming from all sides. It sounded like someone or something was circling the vehicle, knocking at the walls, at the windows. I couldn't bring myself to move. Then the footsteps started. Heavy, deliberate thuds like boots crunching on gravel. They moved slowly, methodically, pacing back and forth outside the RV. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking, and crawled out of bed. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "You're imagining things. It's nothing." But I wasn't imagining it. I peered through the window, and there it was, the figure, standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the darkness. Its shape was clearer now, a tall, gaunt figure with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I stumbled back from the window, heart racing. The tapping grew more frantic, the footsteps louder. My head spun with fear and confusion. What was it? Why was it here? I bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard a voice. "David." I froze. It was Megan's voice, soft, familiar, and unmistakable. "David, come outside." My breath caught in my throat. "Megan?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "Come to me." I stared at the door, my hand trembling on the latch. The voice was so clear, so real. But Megan wasn't here. She couldn't be. It wasn't her. "David, please." The voice grew more insistent, more urgent, but something in the tone was wrong, off. It wasn't her. It couldn't be. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping and footsteps stopped all at once, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the forest felt different, lighter somehow. The figure was gone, and the RV started on the first try. I didn't waste any time. I packed up and drove away, leaving the forest behind as quickly as I could. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me. That maybe, just maybe, I didn't leave it behind. Some things can't be explained. Some things, I realize now, are better left undisturbed. My name is Gary Ellis, and back in 2018, I decided to take my RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. Being a freelance photographer had its perks. I could work anywhere, and I had a penchant for capturing untouched landscapes. I thought a solo trip would not only boost my portfolio, but also give me a much-needed break from city life. I'd been on the road for a few days, enjoying the serene beauty of the mountains and the crisp, clean air. The park was less crowded than usual, which was perfect for someone like me who enjoyed solitude. I set up camp near a quiet spot overlooking a glacier lake. The view was postcard perfect, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought that my friends were stuck in cubicles while I had this paradise all to myself. Guess the early bird really does get the worm, or in this case, the perfect shot, I mused to myself. After a day of hiking and snapping photos, I returned to my RV to find a note pinned to the door. It read, "Beautiful place, isn't it? Be careful out here." No signature, nothing else. I glanced around but saw no one. It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably some local's way of being friendly, or maybe trying to spook the tourists. Either way, I wasn't going to let it ruin my mood. The next morning, I headed to a nearby trail recommended by a ranger I had chatted with earlier. "You'll find some rare wildlife if you're lucky," he'd said. As I trekked deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around me. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves provided a soothing soundtrack, and I felt at ease. About an hour into the hike, I came across an old, weathered cabin. It wasn't on any map I had, and I hadn't heard anyone mention it. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached the cabin, noticing that the door was slightly ajar. Probably abandoned, I thought. Still, I knocked. No answer. I pushed the door gently, and it creaked open. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with various trinkets, old lanterns, fishing gear, and dusty furniture. On a table lay a collection of photographs. I picked one up and felt a chill run down my spine. It was a picture of me setting up my RV. Another showed me hiking earlier that day. "This can't be," I whispered, my mind racing. Someone had been watching me, documenting my every move. I heard footsteps outside. Panicking, I quickly placed the photo back and hid behind a large cabinet. The door swung open and a man walked in, humming an off-key tune. He was tall, with unkempt hair, wearing a worn-out flannel shirt. He carried a hunting knife on his belt and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Got some good shots today," he mumbled to himself, laying down a camera on the table. My camera. I instinctively felt for my backpack. It was gone. How had he taken it without me noticing? My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He started flipping through the photos on the camera, chuckling. "You have a good eye," he said aloud as if speaking to me directly. "Shame you'll be leaving so soon." I needed to get out of there. Slowly, I inched toward the back door, keeping my eyes on him. Just as I reached for the doorknob, it squeaked. He turned abruptly. "Who's there?" he demanded, his jovial demeanor vanishing. Thinking quickly, I said, "Just a lost hiker. Didn't mean to intrude." I stepped out from behind the cabinet, hands raised. He eyed me suspiciously. "Lost, huh? These woods aren't safe for people who don't know their way." I forced a laugh. "Tell me about it. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere." He glanced at the camera and then back at me. "You take good pictures." "Thanks," I replied cautiously. "I actually came looking for wildlife to photograph." "Wildlife, you say?" He smirked. "Sometimes the most dangerous creatures aren't animals." I swallowed hard. "Well, I should probably get going before it gets dark." He blocked the doorway. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that." My mind raced for a way out. "Why is that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tapped the knife on his belt. "You see, folks around here don't take kindly to trespassers." I needed to distract him. "I didn't see any no trespassing signs. Maybe I can make it up to you? I have some supplies back at my RV, food, even some good coffee." He seemed to consider this. "Coffee, huh? Been a while since I had a decent cup." "Absolutely," I said, seizing the opportunity. "Let's head over and I'll brew you the best cup you've had in years." He nodded slowly. "All right, but no funny business?" "Of course not," I assured him. We walked back toward my campsite. I tried to keep the conversation light. "So, do you live out here all alone?" He glanced at me. "Been out here for years. The forest provides everything I need." "Must be peaceful," I commented. He chuckled. "You'd be surprised." We arrived at my RV and I gestured for him to take a seat outside. "I'll just grab the coffee from inside." He stood by the door. "I'll come with you." "Sure," I said, trying to hide my unease. Inside the RV, I began preparing the coffee, all the while plotting my escape. If I could just get him to lower his guard. "Mind if I use the restroom?" he asked. "Go ahead," I replied, pointing him in the right direction. As soon as he was out of sight, I grabbed my keys and quietly opened the driver's side door. Just as I was about to start the engine, he appeared in the doorway, eyes wild. "Going somewhere?" he snarled. I didn't answer. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. He lunged at me, but I hit the gas, causing him to stumble backward. The RV sped down the makeshift path, bouncing over rocks and roots. A loud bang echoed through the air. My side mirror shattered. He was shooting at me. "This guy really doesn't want me to leave," I muttered. Spotting a narrow trail to the left, I took a chance. The RV barely fit between the trees, branches scraping against the sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. Finally, the dense forest began to thin. I burst onto a paved road. I didn't stop until I reached a ranger station several miles away. I stumbled inside, out of breath. "There's a man out there. He attacked me," I managed to say. The rangers exchanged glances. "Calm down and tell us what happened," one of them said. I recounted the events, and they listened intently. When I mentioned the cabin, one of the rangers frowned. "There's no cabin out there, at least none that's supposed to be occupied." Another ranger chimed in. "We've had reports of missing hikers in that area." They immediately dispatched a team to investigate. I insisted on going with them to point out the location. As we arrived, the cabin looked eerily quiet. The door was closed, no signs of life. The rangers approached cautiously, weapons drawn. They signaled for me to stay back. After a few tense minutes, they emerged. "Place is empty," one of them said. "But you need to see this." Inside, the cabin had been cleared out. No photos, no belongings, nothing. It was as if no one had ever lived there. "He was here," I insisted. "He had photos of me, of others." One of the rangers found a hidden trapdoor beneath a rug. Opening it revealed a cellar filled with personal items, backpacks, clothing, cameras, all belonging to different people. "This doesn't look good," a ranger muttered. They continued to search and found a map marked with various locations around the park. "These are campsites," I pointed out. "He might be targeting more people." The rangers called for backup and began collecting evidence. As we exited the cabin, a chilling thought struck me. "He knew you'd come," I said. "That's why he left." "Don't worry," a ranger assured me. "We'll find him." Over the next few days, the park was closed as authorities conducted a thorough search. They discovered more hidden spots, a network of cabins and tunnels. It became clear that the man had been operating in the area for years, preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers. The news reported on the Glacier Park Predator, warning people to stay vigilant. They found several bodies in shallow graves, bringing a grim end to the search for some missing persons. I was asked to give a statement and help identify the items found. It was a sobering experience, realizing how close I came to becoming another statistic. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave the area for good, a detective approached me. "We found something you might want to see," he said. He handed me a photograph, a picture of the man, much younger, standing with a group of park rangers. "His name is Thomas Hale," the detective explained. Former ranger who went off the grid after being suspected of misconduct. "Why wasn't he caught before?" I asked. "He was clever, knew the land better than anyone," the detective replied. "Used his knowledge to avoid capture." I nodded, absorbing the information. "So what's next?" "We'll keep searching, but with the terrain and his skills, it won't be easy." I left Montana the next day, the events weighing heavily on my mind. As I crossed state lines, I couldn't help but think of the others who weren't as lucky. The experience had been harrowing, but I was grateful to have made it out alive. Several months later, I received a call from the detective. "We got him," he said simply. "That's a relief," I replied. "He was found trying to set up another cabin in a different park," the detective continued. "He's in custody now." "Good to hear," I said, feeling a sense of closure. The whole ordeal had been surreal here, like something out of a thriller novel. But it was real, and it was over. As for Thomas Hale, he was charged with multiple counts, and the evidence was overwhelming. The families of the victims finally got some answers, though it could never bring their loved ones back. I returned to my photography, choosing subjects a bit closer to civilization. After all, as much as I loved the solitude of nature, I figured there was something to be said for the safety of crowds. And maybe, just maybe, the best shots were the ones that didn't come with a side of danger. I remember it like it happened yesterday, even though it was a couple of years ago now. I had decided to take a break from the city and go camping in my RV. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, but I had everything I needed. My name's Brian Gibson, and at that time, I was working a desk job that drained my soul bit by bit. The idea of spending a weekend in nature, away from emails and endless meetings, sounded like heaven. I chose a spot in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, not too far from the town of Hamilton. It wasn't a popular camping spot, which suited me just fine. Less noise, fewer people. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp, cooked some burgers on the portable grill, and sat by the campfire, enjoying the quiet. As the sun set, the sounds of the forest took over. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. The next day, I decided to explore the woods a bit. There was a small trail that led deeper into the forest, so I grabbed my backpack, a bottle of water, and set off. It was late afternoon by the time I realized I had wandered farther than I intended. The forest was dense, and the trail had become less clear. I turned around, hoping to retrace my steps, but everything looked different. It was as if the trees had shifted while I wasn't looking. I wasn't panicking yet. I had my phone with GPS, but as luck would have it, there was no signal. I walked for another hour, maybe two, until the light began to fade. Then I heard it, a scream, distant but unmistakable. It was a man's scream, full of terror. I froze, listening. The forest was silent again, but that scream had set my nerves on edge. I decided to head in the direction I thought the scream had come from, thinking someone might need help. As I walked, the trees seemed to close in around me. The forest felt oppressive, the air heavy. My mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe someone had an accident, or maybe it was just my imagination. Then I found it, a campsite, but it was a mess. The tent was torn, supplies scattered everywhere. It looked like a struggle had taken place. Blood spattered on the ground confirmed my worst fears. I called out, but there was no answer. There was no sign of whoever had been camping there. I found a wallet among the debris. The driver's license said Benny Caldwell. I didn't know what to do. It was getting dark and I didn't want to be caught out in the open. I decided to head back to my RV and report this to the authorities. But finding my way back was another challenge. The forest seemed even more labyrinthine in the dark. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the woods, I saw a light in the distance. Relief washed over me as I realized it was my campfire. I practically ran the last stretch, feeling an irrational sense of safety once I was back in my RV. I locked the doors and tried to calm down. I thought about driving out of there immediately, but fatigue hit me like a truck. I decided to wait until morning. Sleep was elusive that night. Every rustle outside, every creak of the RV set my nerves on edge. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was subtle at first, then more insistent. It was coming from the door. I grabbed a flashlight and my camping knife. Not much, but it made me feel a bit safer. I crept to the door and listened. The scratching stopped. Then there was a bang, and the whole RV shook. I fell back, dropping the flashlight. In the darkness, I could hear heavy breathing, something scraping against the metal of the RV. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the flashlight, shining it toward the door. For a moment, everything was still. Then something hit the window. A face, pale and twisted, eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. I shouted, stumbling back, and the face disappeared. The next few hours were a blur of fear and adrenaline. The scratching and banging continued intermittently. I thought about calling for help, but my phone still had no signal. I was trapped. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the noises stopped. I waited a while longer before cautiously opening the door and stepping outside. The campsite was eerily quiet. There were scratch marks on the RV, deep grooves in the metal. I decided enough was enough. I packed up as quickly as I could and got ready to leave. As I was about to get in the driver's seat, I noticed something on the ground, a torn piece of cloth stained with blood. It wasn't there the night before. I drove straight to the nearest town and found the police station. I reported everything. Benny Caldwell, the screams, the attack on my RV. The officer took my statement, but seemed skeptical. He said they'd look into it, but mentioned that the Pine Barrens were full of wildlife and sometimes people imagine things in the dark. I left feeling frustrated and scared. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. Every noise at night made me jump. I kept thinking about that face in the window, those eyes. I tried to move on, to forget about it, but it stayed with me. A few months later, I saw a news report about a missing person in the Pine Barrens. The name caught my eye, Benny Caldwell. They had found his body, or what was left of it, deep in the woods. The police called it a bear attack, but I knew. The report mentioned other disappearances over the years, hikers and campers who went into the Pine Barrens and never came out. I started researching, trying to find out more about what might be out there. There were stories, old legends about the Jersey Devil and other creatures, but nothing concrete. Just a lot of speculation and fear. One night, I was at a bar talking to a local who had lived near the Pine Barrens his whole life. He told me a story about a creature, something the locals called the creeper. He said it was an old legend, something parents used to scare their kids, but he looked serious when he told me that people had been disappearing in those woods for decades. The police never found anything, but the locals knew better. They stayed away from the deep woods, especially at night. I don't know if the creeper is real or just a story, but I know what I saw, what I experienced. I haven't been back to the Pine Barrens since, and I don't plan to. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear that scratching sound, and I wonder if it's out there, looking for me. Life went on, and I tried to put the experience behind me. I moved to a different city, started a new job, and made new friends. But the fear never entirely left. I became more cautious, always looking over my shoulder, especially in unfamiliar places. Years later, I got a call from an old friend, Matt, who wanted to go camping. We chose a different location, far from the Pine Barrens in the Adirondacks. The first night was fine, just like old times, sitting by the fire, sharing stories. But on the second night, I woke up to a familiar sound. Scratching. My heart raced as memories of the Pine Barrens flooded back. Some experiences leave a mark that never fully heals. The creeper, or whatever it is, remains a mystery, a dark shadow in my past that I can't escape. So if you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens or any deep, dark forest, be careful. Listen to the locals, heed their warnings. And if you hear scratching at your door in the middle of the night, don't open it. Some things are better left unseen. My name is Paul Miller, and back in 2007, I was camped out in my RV at Devil's River State Natural Area in Texas. The irony wasn't lost on me, camping at a place called Devil's River. But the spot had rave reviews from folks who swore it was the best place to get away from the world. At the time, getting away was exactly what I needed. Just me, my secondhand RV, and no one around to bother me. I'd come down after my business took a hit, figuring some solitude would straighten me out. Give me time to think, like people say. Now, if you've never been to Devil's River, picture this. Miles of desert scrub, dusty as you can imagine, with narrow paths winding through thorny mesquite and juniper trees. The river itself is cold and clear, carved through canyons with cliffs jutting up on either side, giving the area this closed-in, almost claustrophobic feel. You're out there and it feels like the rest of the world doesn't exist. So I'm about 3 days into my little retreat when things get strange. Now, I'm not one for superstitions or spooking myself, but the first night I heard some noises outside my RV. I chalked it up to animals. Coyotes or raccoons, maybe? There were these quiet, shuffling sounds like something dragging along the ground, but I ignored it, thinking it was probably just the wind. On the second night, I heard something again, only this time, it was closer. There was a light scraping against the side of the RV. It sounded almost deliberate, like someone running a stick along the metal siding. I grabbed a flashlight, flicked it on, and looked out the window. Nothing. Just the scrub bushes and the dark stretch of riverbank. But I could feel something out there, just beyond the reach of the light. I laughed it off, maybe a little too loudly, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But I knew something was off. Day 3, I decided to go for a hike down the river trail to shake off whatever jitters I'd picked up. I'm walking along, minding my own business, when I spot this old abandoned camp sucked back in the trees. There was a tent, half collapsed, with bits of clothing scattered around and a rusty bent knife lying in the dirt. Now, I'm no detective, but even I could tell something didn't sit right. It looked like whoever was here left in a real hurry. But that knife, that caught my attention. It wasn't just bent, it looked twisted, like someone had jammed it against something hard, something unyielding. Now, here's where things get serious. That night, after a long day of hiking, I'm sitting by my RV, grilling up some dinner. It was that perfect, eerie quiet that comes only when you're truly alone. And then I smelled it. A sharp, sour stench that hit me out of nowhere, like rotting meat mixed with damp soil. I glanced around, but there was nothing in sight, just the darkening desert. Figuring some animal had met an unfortunate end nearby, I shrugged it off. But when I stepped back inside the RV, that smell hit me full force. It was like it had seeped into the walls. I threw open the windows, thinking maybe it would clear out, but that only made it worse. And that's when I heard it, a faint, muffled groaning sound coming from right under my RV. I'll admit it, I froze. My heart was pounding, my hands slick on the flashlight as I bent down, shining the beam underneath. And there it was, a filthy, pale figure lying on the ground, half hidden in the shadows. His clothes were in tatters, and he was muttering to himself, something I couldn't quite make out. His face was a mess, crusted with dirt, and his hands were bloody, like he'd been dragging himself along the ground. I managed to get a grip and shouted, "Hey, what the hell are you doing here?" He looked up, his face blank, like he didn't even register I was there. Then he started laughing, a low, humorless laugh that sounded like it was scraping out of his throat. "You're next," he said, voice slurred like he was in a daze. "Next for what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But he just kept muttering to himself, a string of words that sounded like nonsense, broken up by bouts of laughter. At this point, I was ready to pack up and hightail it out of there, but he reached up, grabbing the side of the RV with one hand, and heaved himself to his feet. I took a step back, thinking I'd keep my distance, but he lunged forward faster than I expected. His other hand swung up, and I realized he was holding that twisted knife I'd seen earlier. It was like the air itself froze. He was muttering something about purging the filth, words that made my skin crawl. I was stuck, backed against the RV with nowhere to go as he came closer, his eyes unfocused but full of this sick determination. That's when I remembered the grill fork I'd left sitting on the picnic table. I grabbed it, clutching it like my life depended on it. And believe me, it did. He lunged again, slashing with that twisted knife, but I managed to dodge. The knife grazed past my arm. I jammed the grill fork forward, catching him in the side, and he let out a strangled grunt, staggering back. He looked down at the fork sticking out of him, his face twisting into this grotesque smile. "You're filth too," he rasped, pulling the fork out like it was nothing. Blood started pouring down his side, but he didn't seem to care. We were locked in this sick game of cat and mouse around the RV, me with my grill fork, him with that mangled knife. He came at me again, and this time, I managed to knock the knife out of his hand, sending it skittering under the RV. He didn't even flinch, just lunged forward with both hands, trying to choke me. I was fighting for air, pushing against him with everything I had when I saw headlights. Another camper pulling in down the trail. In the split second he was distracted, I swung the grill fork as hard as I could, catching him across the face. He staggered back, stunned, and I took the chance to shove him off me and ran toward the other camper's headlights, yelling for help. The driver jumped out, seeing the blood on my arm and the crazed look in my eyes. I don't even remember what I said, but he called the cops immediately. They found the guy lying in a heap next to my RV, unconscious from blood loss. Turns out he was an escaped convict, a psycho with a history of violent attacks. The next morning, after the cops cleared out, I took a good look around that abandoned campsite again. Buried under some rocks near where I found the knife were bones, human bones, picked clean and brittle. They figured he'd been hiding out there for weeks, surviving on whatever he could catch, animal or otherwise. I left Devil's River that day, making one last stop at a diner to shake off the adrenaline. When the waitress asked where I'd come from, I just said, "Devil's River." And she laughed, like I was telling a joke. Most people assume a job with the government is a safe gig, pension, health insurance, a sense of security. I thought the same until I got transferred to the Special Research and Containment Unit, SRCU. It's one of those divisions that doesn't officially exist. You know the type, where there's no nameplate on the door and your paycheck just says federal compensation. They brought me on because I was a damn good tracker. Years spent in the Army hunting down insurgents in the middle of nowhere, then a stint with Homeland Security tracking down unusual threats, the kind that most people don't even know are real. The SRCU was different from anything I'd ever been a part of. They called us hunters, but we weren't chasing anything normal. Cryptids, creatures, monsters, whatever you want to call them. The brass handed us dossiers with little more than grainy photos and secondhand accounts from the survivors, most of whom were half mad by the time we got to them. It's the kind of work that keeps you up at night, and it sure as hell isn't something you can talk about at a bar. I've always been a straightforward guy, follow orders, get the job done, and move on. But this job, it's the kind that sticks with you, no matter how many showers you take afterward. The last mission I went on was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. We were deployed to the forests of West Virginia near a small, unmarked town named Hollow Creek. The locals had been reporting strange disappearances, mostly drifters, people who wouldn't be missed, but then a couple of kids went missing, and that's when the feds got involved. By the time we were called in, the local police had already thrown in the towel. They chalked it up to wild animals, maybe a rogue bear. But our briefing made it clear this wasn't any bear. We were a team of 4. Me, 2 other agents from the SRCU, and a local guide named Roy Caldwell. Roy was an older guy, leathery from years spent hunting in those woods. He wasn't one to scare easily, but even he seemed spooked by the reports. He didn't say much on the chopper ride out, just kept his eyes on the trees as we flew over the thick canopy. "They call it the Hollow Man," Roy finally muttered as we landed, his voice barely audible over the rotor blades. "They say it looks like a man, but it ain't. It's something else." The mission was simple: locate the creature, eliminate the threat, and bring back any evidence. We were armed to the teeth. Shotguns loaded with incendiary rounds, silver-tipped bullets, and a few experimental weapons the eggheads in the lab cooked up. But as we hiked deeper into the woods, I had the distinct feeling that none of it would matter. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, makes your ears strain for any sound. The ground was soft underfoot, carpeted with fallen leaves that had gone uncrushed for what seemed like centuries. Every so often, we'd come across a patch of earth that had been torn up as if something massive had passed through. Roy would crouch down, examine the disturbed soil, and shake his head. "No tracks," he said each time. "No sign of what did this." Hours passed and the tension grew thicker. With each step, we found the first body, just after sunset. It was one of the missing kids, a teenager no more than 16. His body was draped over a low branch as if he'd been dropped from above. His limbs were twisted at odd angles, and his face was frozen in a look of pure terror. But what struck me most was the precision. There were no claw marks, no bites, just a single clean wound right at the base of his skull. "This isn't right," one of the agents muttered. "No animal does this." We pressed on, the darkness closing in around us. Our flashlights barely pierced the thick gloom, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance just out of reach. Then we found the second body. This time it was one of the drifters, a man in his 50s. He was sprawled out on the forest floor, his torso split open like a book. His organs were missing, completely gone, as if they'd been carefully removed. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air, metallic and nauseating. Roy crossed himself, muttering something under his breath. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "We ain't prepared for this." But it was too late. We were already being hunted. The first sign of it came as a low rustling in the trees. We all spun around, weapons raised, but there was nothing there, just the dark pressing in on us. Then came the sound, a wet tearing noise, like flesh being ripped apart. It was close, too close. I barely had time to react before something huge barreled into us, knocking two of the agents to the ground. It moved so fast that I only caught glimpses. A flash of pale skin, too pale to be human, and limbs that were long, too long, bending at unnatural angles. It was hunched over, its back arched, and as it slashed at the agent nearest to it, I saw its hands, long fingers tipped with something sharp. Not quite claws, but close enough. I fired off a round, the shot echoing through the trees. The creature recoiled, its body twisting away from the impact, but it didn't drop. Instead, it turned those impossible limbs toward me, its head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible. There was a face, or something resembling a face, but it was distorted, like someone had tried to stretch features over something that wasn't meant to wear them. It lunged again, moving faster than anything that size should. I managed to fire again, this time hitting it square in the chest. It stumbled, giving me just enough time to grab one of the experimental weapons, a sort of compact flamethrower we'd been issued for situations just like this. I didn't hesitate. I unleashed a torrent of fire at the creature. The flames licked across its skin, and for a moment I thought it might work. But then it screamed, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that sent us all to our knees. The creature flailed wildly, at the fire catching on the nearby trees, turning the whole area into an inferno. But it didn't fall, it just kept moving, its body a blazing silhouette against the roaring flames. Roy was the first to break. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. I don't blame him. Any sane man would have done the same. But there was no escaping that thing. It was faster than any of us, and within seconds, I heard Roy's screams cut off abruptly. The creature rounded on me, its flesh still burning but seemingly unaffected by the flames. I could see the raw, charred muscle beneath its skin, could smell the sickening scent of burning meat. It was almost on me when the second agent fired a shot, this one with a silver-tipped bullet. The creature paused, just for a split second, and that was all I needed. I pulled the trigger on the flamethrower again, this time aiming directly at its head. The flames engulfed it, and it staggered, emitting another ear-piercing shriek. But this time, it fell to the ground, writhing and convulsing. I didn't let up, not until it stopped moving altogether. The fire was spreading rapidly, consuming the forest around us. I grabbed the last remaining agent, and we hauled ass out of there, not stopping until we were clear of the blaze. When we finally reached the chopper, we were both covered in soot, our skins singed and blistered. The report was simple. Mission accomplished, threat neutralized. The creature's charred remains were recovered, just enough to confirm its existence. No one questioned our account. There were too many bodies, too much blood. The proof was undeniable. As the chopper lifted off, I looked back at the forest, now a smoldering ruin. Whatever that thing was, it was dead, and that was all that mattered. My name is Susan Moody. I'm 33 years old, and this story happened last summer after a devastating accident on a school field trip where one of my students drowned. I've carried a crushing weight of guilt. The world called it an accident, but in my heart, I couldn't let it go. I needed space, time to think and heal, or so I thought. That's why I took my RV to Yellow Smoke Park in Denison, Iowa. I told myself the trip was about peace and closure. I'd hike, write in my journal, and maybe find some kind of forgiveness. But Yellow Smoke had other plans for me. I arrived on a warm June morning. The lake sparkled under the sun, and the woods around the campground buzzed with life. It looked idyllic, exactly the kind of place I'd imagined. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, close enough to hear the water lapping against the shore, but far enough from the main camping area to feel the solitude I craved. The first day was uneventful. I walked the trails, snapping photos of birds and wildflowers, and returned to my RV just as the sun began to set. That's when I heard it for the first time. Faint laughter, high-pitched and joyful, coming from the direction of the lake. I smiled despite myself. It was nice to hear kids playing, a reminder of the good moments I'd had with my students before the accident. But as I peered out the window, something felt off. The campground was quiet, and I hadn't seen any families nearby. Yet near the water's edge, I saw a little girl. She was playing alone, her pale dress swaying in the breeze. "Hey, sweetie," I called, stepping out of the RV. "Where are your parents?" The girl froze. Slowly, she turned to look at me. Her face was blank, expressionless. My stomach twisted. She pointed toward the lake, then turned and ran toward the water, disappearing into the mist. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe her parents were just out of sight, or maybe I was tired from the long drive. That night, I wrote about her in my journal, describing her pale dress and the odd, hollow look in her eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of faint knocking. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I heard it again. Deliberate, rhythmic, and coming from the door of my RV. Heart pounding. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window. The knocking stopped, but as I shone the beam of light across the foggy campground, I saw them. Small, muddy handprints streaked across the side of my RV. I slammed the curtain shut and spent the rest of the night clutching my flashlight and listening to whispers that seemed to float on the breeze. The next day, I tried to distract myself with another hike. The woods were dense and lush, the air cool beneath the canopy of leaves. I told myself that what had happened the night before was just my imagination. That's when I saw her again. The little girl. She was standing at the edge of the trail, watching me. "Hi," I said cautiously, stepping closer. She tilted her head. "Do you want to play?" The question sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced a smile. "Where are your parents?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and started walking deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed her. We emerged into a clearing where an old rusted playground stood. Swings creaked in the breeze, and a decayed slide leaned precariously to one side. Carved into the wood of a splintered seesaw were names. Dozens of them, some faded, some fresh. "What is this place?" I asked. But the girl was gone. I returned to my RV, shaken. That evening, I drove into town to pick up some supplies and couldn't resist asking the cashier about the playground. "You found that old thing?" she said, her face pale. "No one's used it in years." "Why not?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "Because it's cursed. Everyone knows that. Kids drown in that lake, and their spirits linger. They say they're looking for playmates." I forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Ghost stories." "You believe what you want," she said, her tone serious. I drove back to the campground with a heavy heart, the weight of the stories pressing against my chest. That night, the little girl came to my RV door. I heard her faint voice calling, "Susan, come outside. We can play now." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told her my name. I stayed frozen in my seat, clutching my flashlight as the knocking began again, this time more insistent. When I finally worked up the courage to look out the window, I saw not just her, but a group of children. Their faces were pale and their eyes dark. They surrounded the RV, their small hands leaving streaks of mud across the windows. "Come play with us," they chanted, their voices overlapping in an eerie melody. I screamed, grabbing my journal and clutching it to my chest. The next morning, I resolved to end it. I hiked back to the playground, Bruguera determined to face whatever was haunting me. The air was thick with tension, the woods unnervingly silent. When I reached the clearing, the children were waiting. Maggie, as I'd come to call the little girl, stood at the center. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were filled with sadness. "You let us down," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "It was an accident." The other children began to move closer, their pale forms flickering like static. "You let her drown," Maggie said, her tone turning accusing. "I know," I sobbed. "I know I failed. I'm sorry." The children paused, their movements stilling as my words echoed in the clearing. "I'm sorry," I said again, louder this time. "I'm sorry I couldn't save her. I'm sorry I wasn't enough." The children stared at me for a long moment, then began to fade, one by one, until only Maggie remained. "Thank you for playing with us," she said, her voice almost kind. Then she too disappeared. The park was quiet when I returned to my RV. The handprints were gone, and the air felt lighter, less oppressive. I left a bouquet of wildflowers by the lake before I drove away, a small token of my regret and hope for forgiveness. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw Maggie standing by the water, her pale dress swaying in the breeze. She raised a hand in farewell, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of peace. That night, when I opened my journal, I found a new entry written in a child's handwriting. "Thank you for playing with us. We forgive you." My name is Michael Lopez, and this happened to me on a camping trip in the summer of 2022. I was out in the RV with my old college buddy, Sam Driscoll. We decided to take a break from our hectic lives and head out to the Ozarks in Arkansas. Sam and I go way back, and we thought a week away from everything would do us some good. We had this old RV, a beat-up Winnebago that we pooled money together for back in our 20s. We've used it for countless trips, but this trip was different. We arrived at the campsite in the early afternoon. The place was deserted, just the way we liked it. We set up camp, got the fire going, and cracked open a couple of beers. The forest was dense, the trees towering over us, their branches swaying gently in the wind. It was peaceful. After dinner, we sat by the fire, reminiscing about the good old days. Sam mentioned how he hadn't been out camping in years, and how it felt good to be back in nature. I nodded in agreement, the crackling fire casting shadows on our faces. The first night was uneventful. We slept well, the sound of crickets and the occasional owl hooting, lulling us to sleep. It was the second night when things started to get strange. We were sitting around the campfire again, talking about nothing in particular, when we heard it, a rustling in the bushes just beyond the light of the fire. I shrugged it off, probably just a raccoon or something. But Sam, he got this look on his face, a look I hadn't seen in a long time. "You hear that, Frank?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah, probably just some critter," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But the rustling didn't stop. It grew louder, closer. Sam stood up, grabbing the flashlight from the picnic table. He shined it toward the noise, but we couldn't see anything. "Maybe we should check it out," he said, his eyes darting toward the dark woods. I sighed, not really wanting to leave the warmth of the fire, but agreed. We both grabbed flashlights and headed toward the noise. As we got closer, the rustling stopped. The forest was silent, unnaturally so. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I shook it off. We stood there, flashlights scanning the trees, but there was nothing. "Probably just an animal," I said again, trying to convince myself more than Sam. We headed back to the fire, trying to forget about it, but as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I didn't say anything to Sam, but I could tell he felt it too. We decided to turn in early, hoping a good night's sleep would ease our nerves. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay there, staring at the ceiling of the RV, listening to the sounds of the forest. Every little noise made me jump. Around midnight, I heard it again, the rustling. This time it was right outside the RV. I sat up, straining to hear. Sam was already awake, his eyes wide with fear. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, grabbing the baseball bat I kept by the door. We slowly crept toward the front of the RV, trying to be as quiet as possible. I peeked out the window but saw nothing. Then there was a loud bang on the side of the RV. We both jumped, Sam grabbing a kitchen knife. I threw open the door, ready to swing, but there was nothing, just the empty campsite and the dark woods beyond. We stood there for a moment, our breath heavy in the still night air. Then we heard it again, the rustling, but this time it was moving away from us, deeper into the woods. "Maybe we should leave," Sam said, his voice shaky. I nodded, but something inside me wanted to know what was out there. I felt this strange compulsion to follow the noise. I grabbed a flashlight and started toward the woods. "Frank, what are you doing?" Sam called after me. "I just want to check it out." "I'll be back," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I walked toward the noise, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The rustling grew louder and I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck, but I kept going. I don't know how far I walked, maybe a quarter mile when I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the flashlight's reach. It was tall, hunched over, with long arms that almost touched the ground. I couldn't make out its face, but I knew it was watching me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stood there, locked in a silent standoff with this thing. Then it moved, a slow, deliberate step toward me. I took a step back, my flashlight shaking. The figure stopped, then took another step. I turned and ran, not looking back. I burst out of the woods, breathless and terrified. Sam was waiting by the fire, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" he asked. But I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, trying to catch my breath. We decided to leave first thing in the morning. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to be around to find out. We packed up quickly, the unease growing with each passing minute. As we were about to get in the RV, we heard it again, the rustling. But this time it was all around us. I looked around, trying to see where it was coming from, but there was nothing. We jumped in the RV and started the engine. As we pulled away, I saw it again, standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. I didn't say anything to Sam, just kept driving. We didn't talk much on the drive back. The silence was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we finally got home, we went our separate ways, promising to stay in touch, but knowing things would never be the same. A few days later, I got a call from Sam's wife. She was frantic, saying Sam had gone missing. He'd gone out to the store and never came back. The police found his car abandoned on a back road, not far from where we had camped. They never found Sam. I still think about that trip, about what we saw out there. I don't know what it was, but I do know one thing. It's still out there, in those woods, waiting. And I'll never go back. Sometimes late at night, I hear the rustling again. I look out the window, half expecting to see that figure standing there, watching. But there's nothing, just the empty night and the memories of a trip that changed everything. Folks around here call it the Watcher. I don't know what it is, but I know it's real. And I know it's dangerous. So if you're ever out in the Ozarks, be careful. You never know what's watching you from the shadows. My name is Amber Ellis, and I'm 35 years old. This happened in the summer of 2018 during what was supposed to be a peaceful getaway to reconnect with my younger brother Liam, who had just turned 28. I don't know if writing this will make it any easier to believe, but it's all I can do now. There are nights I wake up hearing that sound again, that awful hollow mimicry of my own voice calling out from the woods. It began as Liam's idea. He'd been bugging me for months to take a trip together, just the two of us, like we used to when we were kids. He had a knack for convincing me to humor his wild ideas, so I agreed to a weekend at Split Rock Lighthouse State Park in Minnesota. It was supposed to be simple. A rented RV, a few hikes, and some much-needed sibling bonding. We brought Liam's friend Eric along, though I'd only met him a couple of times, a quiet, broad-shouldered guy in his early 30s who didn't say much but seemed decent enough. Liam swore he was chill and a good buffer for when things got tense between us. The first day passed uneventfully. We parked the RV in a designated spot near the main trails. The plan was to hike, stargaze, and unwind. But of course, Liam couldn't leave well enough alone. That night, as we sat around the fire, he brought up the legend of Raven's Cradle. It was an off-limits area near the cliffs, he explained, where people claimed to see skinwalkers, shape-shifting creatures from Navajo lore. "You're being ridiculous," I said, rolling my eyes. "Skinwalkers aren't even part of Minnesota's history. That's a Southwest thing." "Maybe," Liam shot back, grinning. "But legends spread. Who's to say there isn't something similar here?" Eric just stared into the flames, his jaw tight. I didn't think much of it at the time. "Let's hike there tomorrow," Liam pressed. "Come on, Amber. It'll be fun." I wanted to argue, but his excitement reminded me of when we were kids, sneaking into places we shouldn't. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next morning, we set out. The trail to Raven's Cradle wasn't marked, but Liam had read about it on some amateur folklore blog. We veered off the main path, pushing through dense underbrush. I felt the tension early, a strange prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like we were being watched. "Do you hear that?" Eric asked suddenly, stopping mid-step. We all froze. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness. I shrugged it off, trying to lighten the mood. "Nature's shy," I said, forcing a laugh. Liam didn't respond. He kept walking, his usual bravado muted. The farther we went, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, charged like the moments before a thunderstorm. About an hour into the hike, Eric pointed at the ground. "What the hell is that?" The dirt path was marked with strange prints, large, clawed impressions that looked almost human, but wrong. Liam knelt to inspect them, his face lighting up with excitement. "See? I told you. Skinwalker tracks." "Oh, give me a break," I snapped. "It's probably just a bear." Eric didn't look convinced, and truth be told, neither was I. We reached Raven's Cradle by late afternoon. It was breathtaking, a jagged cliff overlooking Lake Superior, the waves crashing far below. But the beauty couldn't shake the unease that had been building since the hike began. As we set up a small camp to rest, I thought I heard something. My own voice, faint and distorted, echoing from the woods. I turned sharply, my heart pounding. "Did you?" I started, but stopped myself. Liam was busy taking pictures, and Eric looked lost in thought. That night, the first real horror began. We were gathered around a fire outside the RV when Liam froze mid-sentence, staring into the trees. "Did you hear that?" I didn't respond. I'd heard it too. A soft, high-pitched laugh followed by a rustling sound. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, but the beam seemed swallowed by the night. "Probably a raccoon," I muttered, though my voice lacked conviction. "Yeah, a raccoon that laughs," Eric said dryly. His calm demeanor was cracking. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by a low, guttural growl. Liam grabbed a branch from the fire, holding it like a weapon. The next few hours were a blur of terror. Something or someone was stalking us. We saw glimpses of it between the trees, a figure that shifted and twisted, its form flickering between animal and human. When I caught a full glimpse of it, I froze in disbelief. It had Liam's face. Not quite, though. It was an uncanny, distorted version. Its eyes too large, its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. My breath hitched as it mimicked his voice perfectly. "Amber, come here. Come closer." I screamed, backing away, and the thing disappeared into the woods, leaving only the echo of its voice. Back at the RV, we locked ourselves inside, our panic mounting. The generator sputtered out, plunging us into darkness. Scratching sounds started on the walls, followed by heavy thuds on the roof. The creature wasn't just stalking us anymore, it was playing with us. Eric tried to keep us calm, but even he was on edge. "We need to stay inside. It can't get in if we..." A loud crash cut him off. The back window shattered, and a long, clawed arm reached inside. Eric grabbed a knife from the counter and slashed at it, forcing it to retreat, but we knew we couldn't stay there much longer. At dawn, we decided to make a run for it. With the RV no longer safe, we packed what little we could carry and headed toward the main road. The hike back was a nightmare. The creature followed us, its mimicry growing more unsettling. It called out in Eric's voice now, pleading and screaming for help. We tried to ignore it, but the forest seemed to conspire against us. The trails looped back on themselves, leading us in circles. I felt despair creeping in, but Liam grabbed my arm, his face pale but determined. "We can't let it win," he whispered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the skinwalker made its move. It appeared directly in our path, its form more grotesque than ever. This time, it took on Eric's appearance, but its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Eric, the real Eric, stepped forward with the knife. "Go! I'll hold it off." "No," I screamed, but he didn't listen. He charged the creature, his bravery both foolish and heroic. The last thing I saw before Liam pulled me away was Eric's body collapsing as the creature's claws tore into him. Liam remembered something he'd read about skinwalkers, that invoking their true name could weaken them. In desperation, he recited a Navajo chant he'd memorized for his blog. Though it was incomplete, the creature faltered, its form flickering like a dying flame. We seized the moment, running until we broke free of the forest and onto the main road, where a passing car stopped to help. Eric was gone, and the guilt still eats at me. I haven't been back to Split Rock since. Sometimes late at night, I hear it again, the voice calling my name from the woods. If you ever find yourself in those forests, don't listen, and for God's sake, don't follow the voices. My name is David Black, and in 2002 I found myself deep in the uninviting wilderness of Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. Being stationed in the country's largest national park might sound impressive, but I can tell you right now, there's nothing glamorous about days of combing dense forests and jagged, ice-covered slopes in search of people who usually didn't want to be found. But I've got a soft spot for the park. I've been working here for a solid 7 years, and most of the time I wouldn't trade it for anything. Until I got a call from dispatch about an odd case, one that had already rattled the quiet community in McCarthy. 2 hikers, a couple by the name of Jody and Mark O'Connor, had gone missing after setting out for a backcountry trek. They were experienced hikers, the type who meticulously planned every trip, left detailed itineraries, and always checked in on schedule. But this time, they hadn't shown up, and their families were starting to get frantic. Normally, I'd write it off as bad luck or poor planning. People tend to underestimate how quickly this wilderness can turn on you. But there was a catch. They hadn't gone alone. They'd been in the company of a local guide, Sawyer Morgan, who was known to everyone in McCarthy. A rough guy, sure, with a dark sense of humor and a reputation for being a bit reckless, but he knew the land better than most. So when the 3 of them failed to return and no one had heard a whisper from them for 3 days, it struck a nerve in the tight-knit community. I set out early the next morning, feeling a little more apprehensive than usual. The air was bitter cold, slicing right through the layers I'd bundled up in. My partner for the day was Mike Hargrave, a grizzled vet of the Park Service with a knack for telling off-color jokes at the worst possible times. He met me at the trailhead, cracking a grin that told me he was in a better mood than I was. "David," he said, "do you ever get the feeling some folks are just begging for trouble? Look at this." He pointed at the tracks leading into the trees, barely visible beneath a fresh dusting of snow. "Now, that ain't normal." "You ever known Sawyer to get himself lost?" "No," I replied, trying to shake off the sense of foreboding creeping up on me. I hadn't. Sawyer was a bit of a hotshot, but the man knew his way around this place like it was his own backyard. Something didn't sit right, and as we trudged deeper into the forest, the feeling grew stronger. The trees loomed over us, skeletal and silent, a dense wall of dark green and white that seemed to close in tighter with every step. It was mid-afternoon when we stumbled across the first sign that something was wrong, a scattering of gear. Just a water bottle and a torn backpack strap lay half buried in the snow. Mike picked up the bottle, turning it over in his hands. "Looks like Mark's," he said quietly, and then with his trademark humor creeping in, "Probably a case of a nasty breakup. Nothing like a snowstorm to bring out a couple's issues." I didn't laugh. There was a sharpness to the air, something I couldn't quite place. The snow was falling harder now, making it difficult to see too far ahead. Mike and I pressed on, calling their names, hoping for any kind of response. But the forest swallowed every sound, and the quiet started to feel unnatural. We kept walking until dusk, a steady, plodding rhythm that numbed our limbs and frayed our nerves. Just as I was beginning to think we'd have to turn back for the night, I spotted something through the trees, a dark shape, hulking and motionless against the snow, barely discernible in the twilight. At first, I thought it was a downed tree, but as we approached, the smell hit me, iron sharp and sickening. And then I saw it, the body of Sawyer Morgan, slumped and frozen, his skin a pale bluish hue against the snow. His jacket was shredded, hanging in tatters around his body, and his throat, it looked as though something had torn it open with a single swipe. Mike swore under his breath, taking a step back. "Holy hell," he muttered. "That's not an accident." We circled the scene, examining the snow for tracks, trying to piece together what had happened, but the snow was disturbed, a mess of half-covered footprints and what looked like claw marks gouged into the ground. I'd seen my share of animal attacks, but this was something else. No bear or wolf could do this with such precision, and there wasn't a trace of blood anywhere except on the body. We marked the location and radioed in, telling dispatch we'd found one of the 3 missing hikers, but the response was static, broken up by the worsening storm. It was already getting dark, and with the temperature dropping fast, we knew we didn't have long before the cold would start taking its toll. Just then, we heard it. A faint sound, like something scraping against a tree somewhere close by. Both of us froze, straining our ears, but the noise had stopped as quickly as it had started. Mike whispered, "Alice, tell me you heard that." I nodded, gripping my flashlight a little tighter. The darkness around us seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. We moved slowly, inching forward when another sound broke the silence. It was closer this time, almost right beside us. A crunch, as if something heavy was moving through the snow, slowly, deliberately. I raised my flashlight, casting the beam over the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a massive shape standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching. I couldn't make out any details, just the bulk of it, like a bear, but wrong. It was hunched, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and there was an unsettling intelligence in the way it moved. Then it lunged toward us. Mike yelled, stumbling back as I aimed my light at the thing, catching a glimpse of claws that looked almost human, elongated fingers tipped with ragged nails. It made a sound, a deep, wet rasp, like it was struggling to breathe, and that was enough to send both of us running. We sprinted through the trees, stumbling over roots and rocks, the sound of its pursuit thundering behind us. I didn't dare look back, too focused on staying ahead of whatever that thing was. I could hear Mike gasping, his footsteps pounding beside mine, and I prayed we'd make it to the trail before it closed the distance. But then, just as we broke through a clearing, I heard him cry out. I turned in time to see him go down, his body dragged back into the shadows as his flashlight flickered and died. His scream was cut short, leaving nothing but silence. I didn't stop. I couldn't. It was survival at that point, pure and simple. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would give out. When I finally dared to stop, I realized I had no idea where I was. The snow was falling in thick sheets now, covering my tracks and leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. The silence was oppressive, the forest unnaturally still. I crouched down, catching my breath, my mind racing as I tried to figure out my next move. That's when I heard it again. That scraping sound, soft and deliberate, coming from somewhere close. I ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding as I fumbled for my radio. I whispered into it, hoping for some miracle that it would pick up a signal. But all I got was static. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The creature stood at the edge of the trees, its head tilted as if studying me. Now that I could see it more clearly, I felt a wave of nausea. It had the body of a predator, lean and muscular, but its skin was stretched too tightly over its bones, giving it a twisted, almost human look. Its mouth was too wide, filled with rows of teeth that looked like they belonged to a shark. And those hands, long, bony fingers that flexed and curled as it watched me. I took a step back, my mind racing through my options, which weren't many. I didn't have a weapon, not even a pocket knife. Running seemed like a death sentence, but staying put wasn't much better. The creature took a step forward, its gaze fixed on me, and I knew I had to make a choice. In a desperate move, I turned and bolted, weaving between the trees, trying to lose it in the dense forest. The thing let out a guttural hiss, and I heard it crashing through the underbrush behind me. My legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last, but I pushed forward, ignoring the burning in my lungs. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I stumbled out of the forest and into a clearing, my chest heaving as I collapsed onto the ground. The storm had worsened, the snow blinding, and I realized I'd somehow circled back to where we'd found Sawyer's body. Except now, there were two bodies. Mike lay sprawled in the snow, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his face frozen in a look of sheer terror. I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling. The thing had dragged him back here, left him as a warning, or maybe just for sport. I didn't want to stick around to find out which. I turned and stumbled through the snow, the cold seeping into my bones, numbing my fingers and toes. I kept moving, driven by pure instinct, not daring to look back. I could still feel it, somewhere in the darkness, following me, relentless and patient, its presence like a shadow pressing in around me. When I finally made it back to the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. I collapsed onto the ground, the snow biting into my skin, but I didn't care. I was alive, and that was enough. My name is Laura Murphy, I'm 30 years old, and I write for a travel magazine. This happened last October when I took my RV to Devil's River State Natural Area in Texas to research a piece for an article called Hidden Gems of Texas. I thought I was prepared for the isolation, the wilderness, and even the eerie stories about the place. I was wrong. What I experienced there still haunts me. I arrived late in the afternoon, my RV kicking up a cloud of dust as I drove along the unpaved road to the campground. Devil's River was stunning, crystal clear water winding through rocky terrain flanked by sprawling desert vegetation. The remoteness was exactly what I was looking for. No cell service, no crowds, just nature in its purest form. After parking in a designated spot near the river, I stepped out to stretch and breathe in the crisp, dry air. That's when a sheriff's vehicle rolled up beside me. The man inside, a stocky, middle-aged man in a tan uniform, stepped out and tipped his hat. "You must be the writer," he said, his voice steady but friendly. "I'm Sheriff Hank Moreno. Just, wanted to check in, make sure you're set up okay." "Thanks," I said, brushing dust off my jeans. "Just got here. It's beautiful." "It is," he replied, his expression softening, "but it's also dangerous if you're not careful. This place gets real dark at night, and the river is deeper than it looks. Stick to the trails and don't wander too far after sundown." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, forcing a smile. "Good," he said, tipping his hat again before climbing back into his vehicle. Welcome to Devil's River. As I set up my RV, I noticed another camper about 100 yards away. She had a small tent pitched by the river and a collection of gear that suggested she was staying longer than me. She waved as I passed, and I decided to introduce myself. "Hey, I'm Laura," I said, "here for the weekend." The woman smiled, brushing her curly hair out of her face. "Becky Turner. I'm here for as long as it takes." "As long as what takes?" I asked. "The Devil's Light," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "You've heard of it, right?" I shrugged. "Something about a glowing light?" The sheriff didn't mention it. Becky nodded, her smile widening. "It's an old legend. People say it's a spirit that lures travelers into the wilderness. Some call it a will-o'-the-wisp. Others say it's the devil himself. I'm here to find out." I tried not to laugh. "So you're a ghost hunter?" "Amateur paranormal investigator," she corrected, "and Devil's River is one of the most active spots in Texas." I nodded politely, but her enthusiasm bordered on absurd. Still, she seemed harmless enough. That night, I set up my camera to capture the stars. The sky here was unlike anything I'd seen before, a vast canvas of shimmering light. Around midnight, as I adjusted the exposure, something caught my eye. A faint, flickering light danced across the river. At first, I thought it was another camper's lantern, but it moved too smoothly, too deliberately. I grabbed my zoom lens and focused on the light. It appeared to hover above the water, shifting between white, yellow, and a strange bluish-green hue. "Laura!" Becky's voice called out behind me, startling me. I turned to see her jogging toward me, flashlight in hand. "Did you see it?" she asked, breathlessly. I asked. "Yeah, what is it?" Becky's grin widened. "It's the Devil's Light. We have to follow it." I frowned. "Follow it? Isn't that the whole thing? People who follow it disappear." "That's the legend," she said, "but I'm here to figure out what's really going on. It's probably just gas or reflections, but imagine if it's something more." I hesitated, then shook my head. "I'm staying here. Good luck." Becky looked disappointed, but nodded. "Suit yourself." She headed toward the river, her flashlight bouncing with each step. I watched her disappear into the darkness, my unease growing. The next morning, I ran into Sheriff Moreno while hiking to a scenic overlook. He seemed relieved to see me still in one piece. "I see," he said. "Of course," I replied, though my tone lacked conviction. "Do you know anything about the Devil's Light?" His face darkened. "It's just a story. But I've had to search for enough people who went missing out here to know there's something off about this place. Stay close to camp, Ellie. Don't go chasing things you don't understand." I wanted to argue, to insist that I didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but something about his tone stopped me. I nodded and promised to be careful. That evening, I sat by the river, scribbling notes for my article. The light returned, brighter and closer this time. It moved along the water's surface, then stopped, hovering just above the far bank. "Becky?" I called, but there was no answer. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to her campsite, only to find it abandoned. Her tent was still there, along with her equipment, but Becky was gone. Panic rose in my chest. "Becky!" I shouted into the night, my voice echoing across the canyon. The light flickered, and for a moment I thought I heard her voice. "Laura, help me!" Without thinking, I stepped into the river, the cold water soaking my boots as I waded toward the sound. The further I walked, the brighter the light became until it enveloped me entirely. I stopped, shielding my eyes, and realized I wasn't alone. Figures emerged within the light, shadows of people, their faces hollow and spectral. They reached out to me, their hands translucent and trembling. "Help us," they whispered in unison, their voices layered with desperation. I turned to run, but the water dragged at my legs, holding me in place. One of the figures stepped forward, a woman with long wet hair clinging to her face. It was Becky. "Laura, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't leave me." "Becky," I whispered, my throat dry, her face twisted, her eyes darkening. "Stay with us," she said, her voice overlapping with the others. "Forever." Fear surged through me, and I fought against the water's grip. The light pulsed, growing brighter and hotter, as if it were alive. "No," I screamed, pulling myself free and stumbling back toward the shore. The whispers grew louder, turning into wails that echoed in my skull. When I reached the riverbank, the light disappeared, plunging the area into silence. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, my heart pounding. The next morning, Sheriff Moreno found me packing up my RV. I told him Becky was missing, and he nodded grimly. "Another one," he muttered under his breath. I debated telling him about the light, about the voices, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. Instead, I handed him Becky's journal, which I'd found near her tent. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw the light flicker behind me. I haven't written about Devil's River. Some stories aren't meant to be shared, but sometimes, late at night, I dream about the light, and the whispers return, and I wonder if Becky's still out there, waiting for someone else to answer her call. My name is Thomas Ramirez, and I'm 44 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened 5 years ago at Hitchcock Nature Center in the Loess Hills of Iowa. I came to that place looking for solitude, a break from the noise of the world, and maybe a way to escape the pieces of my life that were falling apart. What I found was something else entirely, something I still can't explain, but I know was real. It started with my RV, a 1998 Gulfstream I'd picked up after my divorce. I'd spent months fixing it up, replacing the old pipes, tuning the engine, and making it the kind of space I could live in comfortably for weeks at a time. That was the plan: to disappear for a while, recharge in nature, and prove to myself I could still thrive off the grid. Hitchcock Nature Center seemed perfect. Rolling hills, trails for miles, and barely anyone around. It was a little-known gem in western Iowa, tucked into the rugged terrain of the Loess Hills. I thought it would be peaceful. I was wrong. The first night at the park was quiet. I parked the RV at a remote campground away from the few other visitors. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the prairie grass and the occasional cry of a coyote in the distance. I cooked a simple dinner, read a book under the dim glow of my lantern, and went to bed early. The next morning, I met Connor. He was about 30, full of energy, and introduced himself as a cryptid hunter. I'd never heard the term before, but he explained it with a grin, waving a camera drone and pointing at a sound recorder hanging from his belt. "I'm here to find the skinwalker," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I tried to brush him off, but Connor was persistent. He seemed fascinated by the fact that I was camping alone, and when he learned about my survival background, he asked me to join him on a hike to the Devil's Shelf, a rock formation deep in the hills. "You're into this kind of stuff, right?" he said. "Off the grid, rugged terrain, the real deal." I wasn't interested, at least not until Natalie showed up. She was a freelance journalist doing a piece on Connor's obsession with cryptids. She was skeptical, intelligent, and had this way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see right through your excuses. Between the two of them, they convinced me to come along. Not because I believed in skinwalkers, but because I didn't trust them not to get lost or hurt out there. The hike started innocently enough. We set off mid-morning, the sun climbing high over the rolling hills. Connor was in the lead, chattering excitedly about the myths surrounding skinwalkers and how the Navajo believed they were witches who could transform into animals. "They mimic people too," he said with a grin. "Voices, movements, it's how they lure you in." Natalie rolled her eyes. "It's folklore," she said, "a way to explain things that go bump in the night." I stayed quiet, focusing on the trail. The deeper we went, the more rugged and unfamiliar the terrain became. The hills seemed to close in around us, the trees growing denser, the air heavier. By noon, we'd lost the main path entirely, following a deer trail that Connor swore would lead us to the Devil's Shelf. That's when the first strange thing happened. Connor's drone, which he'd been using to map the area, crashed inexplicably. It fell from the sky with a crack, its blades mangled. "That's weird," he muttered, inspecting the damage. "Battery was full." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Maybe your skinwalker doesn't like technology." Connor laughed, but I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. As the day wore on, more things went wrong. The temperature dropped suddenly, the air taking on a chill that didn't match the sunny sky. Our GPS devices started acting up, showing us in places we knew we weren't. And then there were the tracks. Animal prints at first, but as we followed them, they morphed into something else. Barefoot human prints, deep and deliberate, leading into the trees. "That's not normal," I said, breaking the silence. Connor's face lit up with excitement. "Proof," he said. "We're close." But Natalie looked uneasy for the first time. Her confidence wavered. We pressed on, and by late afternoon, we reached the Devil's Shelf, a jagged outcrop of rock overlooking a steep ravine. The place felt wrong. The wind was louder there, almost like it was whispering, and the trees around the clearing seemed unnaturally still. Connor set up his equipment while Natalie took notes, her hand trembling slightly. I wandered to the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw it. A figure crouched low among the trees. It looked like a coyote, but its proportions were all wrong. Its legs were too long, its movements too human. It was watching us. "Thomas," Connor called, snapping me out of it. "Check this out." I turned back to the group, but the figure was gone. Night fell fast in the hills, and we decided to camp at the Devil's Shelf despite my protests. "It's the perfect spot," Connor argued. "No way am I leaving now." Reluctantly, I helped set up camp, keeping my flashlight close. The RV was miles away, and I didn't like the idea of being out here after dark. The fire we built felt small, its light barely penetrating the shadows. The first attack came just after midnight. We were sitting around the fire when the RV started shaking violently. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward it, Natalie close behind. Connor stayed by the fire, shouting something I couldn't make out. The RV's door was open, swinging wildly in the wind. Inside, everything was in disarray. Drawers pulled out, supplies scattered. And there, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It was hunched, its features hidden in the darkness, but its eyes glowed a sickly yellow light that made my stomach turn. It stepped toward me, and as it moved into the light, I saw its face. It was my face. I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The creature grinned, its teeth too sharp, too many. Then it spoke, its voice a perfect imitation of mine. "Thomas, come closer." Natalie screamed, and the thing lunged. I slammed the door shut, and we ran back to the fire where Connor was shouting incoherently. "It's out there," I yelled. "We need to leave now." But leaving wasn't an option. The RV wouldn't start, and the skinwalker was everywhere. It circled the camp, its voice echoing from the darkness, calling our names. Connor was the first to break. He ran into the trees shouting, "I see it! I see it!" We found him hours later, huddled at the base of a tree, muttering nonsense. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He wouldn't respond to us, wouldn't move. Natalie and I dragged him back to the camp, our fear growing with every step. The skinwalker was playing with us, wearing us down. It killed animals around the camp, leaving their mutilated bodies as warnings. It mimicked our voices, our movements, sowing distrust and confusion. By dawn, I was out of ideas. The ash from the fire was my last hope. I remembered reading somewhere that it could ward off evil spirits, so I gathered as much as I could, drawing a circle around me and Natalie. We sat inside, holding Connor between us, and waited. The skinwalker came just before sunrise. It circled the ash, testing it, its yellow eyes glowing in the dim light. It laughed, a horrible guttural sound, and then finally it retreated. We made it back to the RV hours later, Connor barely conscious. The vehicle started this time, and we drove away without looking back. Connor never recovered. He disappeared a few months later, and part of me wonders if he went back to the hills. Natalie published her story, framing it as fiction, but I could see the fear in her eyes whenever she talked about it. As for me, I haven't been back to Hitchcock Nature Center. I sold the RV, moved to the city, and tried to forget. But some nights when the wind is just right, I hear it. The whispering, the laughter. It hasn't left me, and I don't think it ever will. My name is Charles Cooper. I'm 43 years old, and this happened a few months ago when I was camping near Devil's Sinkhole State Natural Area in Texas. It was supposed to be a simple solo trip, a chance to rediscover my love for geology and shake off the lingering bitterness of my divorce. Instead, I encountered something that I can only describe as evil, and it changed the way I see the world and myself. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon after a long and tedious drive over rocky back roads. My RV's tires groaned as I forced it through trails that probably weren't meant for anything larger than an ATV. By the time I reached the edge of the sinkhole, I'd bent a rim and lost an hour to backtracking when I took a wrong turn. Still, the view was worth it. The sinkhole stretched wide and deep in the rocky landscape, its black maw gaping under the pale Texas sky. The guidebook said it was 400 feet deep, and as I stood at the edge, staring into the void, I could believe it. Hundreds of bats emerged from the darkness, their wings slicing through the evening air like whispers of another world. I set up camp close by, just outside the official boundaries of the protected area. The no trespassing signs didn't bother me much. I wasn't planning to do anything destructive. I just wanted a good vantage point for studying the rock formations and maybe capturing some drone footage. It was the perfect spot for inspiration, or so I thought. The first strange thing happened as I unpacked my gear. I'd brought a high-end drone to get detailed images of the sinkhole's interior, but it refused to power on. I charged it the night before, but now the battery was dead. When I swapped it for a spare, the drone buzzed to life, only to lose connection as soon as I tried to fly it over the sinkhole. "Damn signal interference," I muttered, though I couldn't see anything nearby that might have caused it. I shoved the drone aside and grabbed my camera instead. As I set up my tripod, the bats began to swarm out of the sinkhole in greater numbers. I froze, staring as their flight pattern shifted into something unnervingly deliberate. For a moment, they seemed to form the shape of a hand, claws extended, before scattering into the twilight. I laughed uneasily, shaking off the feeling. "Just my imagination," I said out loud, though the words rang hollow. That night, as I lay in my RV, the silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. I was used to the stillness of remote camping, but this was different. It was too quiet, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Then the noises started. At first, it was just a faint groaning sound, like the wind rushing through the canyon, but as I listened, the groan turned into something deeper, almost like a voice. It was low and guttural, resonating from the direction of the sinkhole. "Charles!" I sat up straight, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was my name. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the area. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but rocks and dry scrub. Still, the voice lingered in the back of my mind as though it had etched itself into my thoughts. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination, but I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I found something unusual near the edge of the sinkhole. Partially buried in the dirt was an old, weathered book. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, but the pages inside were intact, filled with strange symbols and passages in a language I couldn't recognize. It looked ancient, and as I flipped through it, I felt a strange unease settle over me. The symbols seemed to shift on the page, their shapes warping and twisting as though they were alive. I should have left it there. I should have walked away, but curiosity got the better of me. I brought the book back to the RV, intending to research it later. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the noises started again. This time, they were louder. "Charles?" The voice was clearer now, echoing from the direction of the sinkhole. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, heavy and malevolent. I stepped outside, clutching my flashlight, and froze. Near the edge of the sinkhole stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with horns that curved against the sky and eyes that glowed like embers. "Who's there?" I called, though my voice wavered. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with those burning eyes. Then it raised one clawed hand and pointed to the book sitting on the RV's table. I backed away, my heart racing. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the echo of its voice. Charles. The next few hours were a blur of panic and confusion. The voice grew louder, now coming from all around me. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, too quick to catch but too real to ignore. The RV's lights flickered wildly, plunging me into darkness before flaring back to life. Desperate for answers, I grabbed the book and began flipping through its pages. The symbols seemed to pulse, their shapes growing sharper and more menacing. My hands trembled as I tried to make sense of the cryptic passages, but the language was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Then the shadows became solid. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms twisting and flickering like flames. They surrounded the RV, their eyes glowing red, their mouths whispering my name over and over. "Charles, Charles, Charles!" I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the book and ran outside, the cold desert air biting at my skin. The figures closed in, their whispers growing into a deafening roar. "What do you want?" I screamed, clutching the book to my chest. The towering figure again, rising from the sinkhole like a shadow brought to life. Its voice boomed, shaking the ground beneath my feet, intact. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, the snow had stopped, and the road out of the Boundary Waters was clear enough to drive. I packed up the RV with shaking hands, leaving behind most of my gear. As I drove away, the forest seemed to watch me, its shadows stretching long and dark across the snow. I haven't returned to the wilderness since. Even now, I hear the Wendigo's whispers in my dreams, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks at the edge of solitude. But I survived. For now, that's enough. Only a minor correction. Wendigo should be capitalized as Wendigo since it refers to a specific creature. Otherwise, the spelling was already correct. I always figured if anything bad ever happened to me, it would be out on the open road, miles away from anyone who could help. Maybe that's why I started carrying a gun. I never wanted to feel helpless, not that I've had to use it before, but it's there, tucked under the seat of my rig, just in case. The highway was quieter than usual that night, and I was heading west, cutting through some remote stretch of Wyoming. The air was crisp. A bite of winter hanging on, even though it should have been warmer by now. I had a load of lumber bound for some construction site in Idaho. Nothing out of the ordinary. My mind was on the job, the kind of solitary thinking that comes when you're hours into a long haul. It wasn't until I hit the small, nearly forgotten town of Pine Ridge that things started to feel off. Not that there was much to the place. A single gas station, a diner that looked like it hadn't served a hot meal in years, and a couple of houses with their windows boarded up. I needed to refuel, so I pulled into the gas station, the only sign of life in the whole town. The pump was ancient, the kind where you have to flip the lever to start the gas flowing. As I filled up, I noticed the attendant inside the station, a wiry man with a weathered face. He was watching me, his eyes never leaving me. I gave him a nod, more out of habit than friendliness, but he didn't respond, just kept staring like he was sizing me up. It made my skin crawl, but I chalked it up to small-town suspicion. Strangers don't exactly roll through Pine Ridge every day. I paid for the gas and got back in the truck, eager to put some miles between me and that town. As I pulled out, I noticed an old, beat-up pickup truck parked on the side of the road. I hadn't seen it when I pulled in, but then again, I wasn't paying much attention. The thing looked like it hadn't run in years, rust eating away at the body and the tires flat against the pavement. An hour later, the road was deserted, just a ribbon of black cutting through the wilderness. That's when I saw the headlights in my mirror. At first, it was just a faint glow, but they got closer. Fast. Too fast. My heart picked up, and I checked my speed. Maybe I was going too slow, but no, I was doing the limit. The lights got brighter, and I could make out the outline of the vehicle behind me. It was that old pickup from Pine Ridge, the same rusted hulk that looked like it shouldn't even be on the road. I kept my eyes on the mirror, expecting the truck to pass me by, but it didn't. Instead, it rode my tail, the headlights nearly blinding me. I tapped the brakes, a warning, but the pickup didn't back off. If anything, it got closer. Something wasn't right. I sped up, trying to put some distance between us, but the pickup matched my speed, staying just a few feet behind me. The road ahead was nothing but darkness, and my mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I reached under the seat, feeling for the cold metal of the gun. My hand gripped the handle, but I didn't pull it out. Not yet. There was a turn up ahead, a sharp one. I could lose him there. Maybe. I flicked on my blinker, even though there was no one else around to see it, and took the turn hard. For a moment, I thought I'd lost him. The road curved through a dense patch of trees, and I couldn't see the headlights anymore. But then they reappeared, brighter than before, as the pickup tore around the bend, nearly clipping the back of my rig. Panic set in, and I floored it, the engine roaring as I pushed the truck faster than I'd ever dared before. The pickup stayed with me, relentless. I couldn't shake him, and then, like something out of a nightmare, he started ramming me. The first hit jolted me so hard I almost lost control. My trailer fishtailed, the weight of the lumber threatening to tip the whole rig over. I gripped the wheel tighter, fighting to keep us on the road. Another hit, harder this time, and I knew I had to do something, or he'd run me off the road completely. I glanced at the gun still under the seat, but the thought of using it while driving terrified me. Instead, I scanned the road ahead, looking for anything that might help. Up ahead, I saw a narrow dirt road branching off to the right. It wasn't on my map, and I had no idea where it led, but it was my only option. I cut the wheel hard, veering off the main road onto the dirt path. The rig shuddered as the tires hit the rough ground, and I prayed the trailer wouldn't flip. The pickup followed right on my tail, its headlights bouncing in the darkness. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for my truck, and lined with thick trees on either side. I could hear the pickup's engine roaring behind me, getting closer and closer. My mind raced with desperate ideas, none of them good. I could try to lose him in the trees, but one wrong move and I'd be wrapped around a trunk. And then, out of nowhere, the road ended. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding in the dirt, and the rig came to a stop just inches from a steep drop-off. The pickup didn't stop. It rammed into the back of my trailer with a sickening crunch, and I heard metal tearing as the trailer swayed dangerously over the edge. The impact threw me forward, and I fought to stay in control. I could feel the weight of the lumber shifting, the whole rig threatening to go over. I had seconds, maybe less. I didn't think. I yanked the gun out from under the seat, kicked open the door, and jumped out. I hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the drop-off. The pickup's engine was still running, the headlights casting an eerie glow over the scene. I scrambled to my feet, the gun in my hand, and turned to face the pickup. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in grease and grime, his clothes tattered, hanging off him like they'd been through hell. He didn't say a word, just started walking toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. I leveled the gun at him, my hands shaking. "Stay back!" I shouted, but he kept coming. Closer now, I could see his face. It was twisted, scarred, like he'd been in 100 fights and lost every one of them. His eyes were cold, empty, like there was nothing human left inside him. He didn't stop. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the trees, and the man staggered but didn't go down. He looked at me, more surprised than hurt, and then kept coming. I fired again, and this time he dropped to one knee, blood seeping through his shirt. But he wasn't dead. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a knife, and lunged at me. I fired a third time, hitting him square in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, finally still. I stood there gasping for breath, the gun still in my hand. The night was silent now, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I walked over to the pickup, looking for any sign of why he'd chased me, but there was nothing. The cab was empty, no ID, no belongings, just a truck that shouldn't have been running. I looked back at the man, his body lying lifeless on the ground. There was no question he was dead. I had the gun, the spent shells, and his blood on my hands. This wasn't something I could just drive away from. But as I stood there, I realized something else. The rig was teetering on the edge, the weight of the lumber pulling it closer to the drop-off. I ran back to it, climbed inside, and slowly, carefully backed it away from the edge. Once I was clear, I drove back to the main road, my heart still pounding. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I found a diner that was still open. I sat in a booth, the gun hidden in my jacket, and ordered a coffee. The waitress gave me a strange look but didn't say anything. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not even the cops. When they eventually found the man's body a few days later, the newspapers called it a tragic accident. An unidentified man found dead in the woods. They never connected it to me, and I never offered up any information. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and got back on the road. The sun was starting to rise, and I had miles to go before my next stop. As I drove, I tried not to think about the man or why he'd come after me. It didn't matter now. He was dead, and I was still alive. That was enough.